come back in style.
Yeah, I know. Oh, it's great. Well, occasionally we all
For the adventurous souls.
Greetings.
Okay, I think.
Recording in progress.
I haven't gone in yet.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. This is a regularly scheduled, but scheduled to the day after our regularly scheduled because of the holiday, meeting of the Zoning and Planning Committee. It's Tuesday, May 28th. I'm Lyle Baker, the chair. We're joined by, in the room, several members of the committee. Councilor Oliver, vice chair. Councilor Ted Bird, member six. We've also been joined online by Councilor Wright, Councilor Getz, Councilor Princeman, who are members of the committee. We've also joined in the room by Councilor happens when you go. Thank you, Larry, Councilor Larry, and also guest Councilor Maliki, I believe, and Councilor Humphrey, as well as Councilor Block. So welcome all, and we've been joined also by members of the city staff who will be introduced in due course. And let me just explain to everyone a little bit about our process. Tonight, we're going to be discussing three items relating to how Newton responds to the challenges of our climate changing climate. Three areas that are, I'll read into the record as we go forward. One involving electrification of new construction and substantial renovation. Another involving reporting of energy use. And third, a report on the progress towards our climate action plan. As I indicated in a memo that was sent out in advance of the meeting today, what I expect to do is to try and have the conversation be among members of the council who are interested in hearing about these items after a briefing by each of the staff involved, and then hold the items so that we can decide how to deal with them. We have a public comment, although no public hearing is required, scheduled for June 10th certainly on the Berto ordinance. I want to see how we go with the electrification and whether we can get through that tonight. But the idea is that I want to use as much of our time on making sure that we've got a clear understanding of what these ordinances are about. And the council can put their questions forward. If they can't be answered tonight, they may be answered on the 10th. And then we've also, as I indicated, the Energy Commission is advising the council on these matters. And I have indicated in the memo that I hope to put them up first in the public comment period for up to 15 minutes to comment on what you hear this evening. Also, I should point out that Councilor Danberg included in the packet a potential amendment to the Berto ordinance. My intention is that she can offer that at any time, but I would not entertain a vote on it until we've heard from the public comment period, because I think that's an important opportunity that we should take advantage of first. So that's the general outline of how we proceed. Any questions on just the general framework? I'm going to indicate that Ms. Norton has joined us here to operate the camera and also to make sure that we hear people who are online as well as you all can hear us. If there's any problem, please let us know. And again, as city staff and officials are participating in the conversation, please identify yourselves if I haven't done it properly so that we can make sure the record is clear and available to everybody. Have I left anything out? Are we all set? Okay, so the first item for discussion is the item 4924, discussion and possible adoption of an ordinance requiring electrification of all new construction and substantial renovations. Specifically, for honor, the mayor and councilors Albright, Danberg, Leary, Humphrey, Kalis, Downs, Lipoff, Wright, Mickley, Bixby, and Getz requesting discussion and possible adoption of an electrification ordinance that would require all new construction and substantial renovations in Newton to be all electric. This is in conjunction with the city's recent conditional approval by the State Department of Energy Resources for participation in the 10 Communities program. As you all may recall, we've had a discussion about this item in the last council. We are now taking it up again. We had sent it back to committee because there were some changes in the draft of the ordinance that were required as a result of some comments from the state. But I'm going to let Ms. Berwick take us through this, and we're joined also by Andrew Lee of the Law Department, who's worked carefully with her on the actual text of the ordinance. So, any questions? If not, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Berwick to lead us through this conversation.
Thank you very much, Chair Baker. I'm not going to go through the whole history of this ordinance unless somebody feels like that would be helpful, because we've been there a number of times, been here a number of times. The main change, I think, that we, in our understanding, came from some changes that the State Department of Energy Resources made in their last draft of the model rule on electrification, which led us to a new understanding of how the electrification ordinance would need to be implemented. So we've circulated a memo with a number of examples, and I'd be happy if anybody had any questions about those to go through them. But here are just a few points that I want to emphasize, and Mr. Lee may have some additions to this. Number one, in importance, I think, is that the electrification ordinance only applies to new construction and major renovations as defined by the DOER rules, major renovations, including additions under the DOER rules. And that means, or one thing I want to point out that means, is that if you do something, if someone does less than a major renovation, a construction project, which doesn't qualify as a major renovation, they can keep whatever gas appliances they may currently have. They can install a gas stove. This only has to do with major renovations, which again include additions over a certain size. So that's one thing I wanted to point out. In the situation in which there is a major renovation, that is a renovation of a certain size as defined in the regulations and in the ordinance, or an addition over a certain size, that major renovation must use all electric appliances. But here's the key point that was clarified by DOER's recent ruling. The rest of the house does not have to be electrified. So just to take an example, if I add an addition to my house that qualifies as a major renovation, that addition has to be fully electrified. If the remainder of the house has gas heat, that gas heat cannot be piped into the renovation. But, and here's the really important point, the rest of the house can keep the gas heat and keep the rest of its gas whatever. Okay, so the electrification ordinance would not require the rest of the house to be electrified in any respect. Here's what it would require for the rest of the house. It would require that the rest of the house meet whatever HERS rating would be required, which is 52 for a mixed fuel building, 55 for an all-electric building. So the rest of the house would have to meet certain energy efficiency standards. It would not have to be electrified. So I just really, that's a change from what was understood earlier. So I really just wanted to emphasize that point. And maybe Mr. Lee wants to add something to this.
Before Mr. Lee, just again, because members of the public may not have read your memo, can you just explain what HERS means, rating, just so the public will understand as well as we?
Yeah, yes. HERS, it stands for Home Energy Rating System. And it is a score. I actually said in the memo, and I want to correct something, I don't think it really matters very much, but I said the HERS rating system went from 0 to 150. In fact, if you look on the web, there are a bunch of places where it does say that, but it's actually, the rating scheme does go from 0 to 150, but 100 is set at an actually old 2006 building energy efficiency standard. And 150 means, which is scored, which is in the rating system, is 50% worse than 100. 100 is an old energy efficiency score. 0 is really, really good, right? You would be producing more energy than you would actually be using on site. So I said the score goes from 0 to 150, and there are some sources that say that it does, but it's really, what you want to remember is it goes from 0 to 100, with 150 being 50% below this old energy efficiency standard. Anyway, that's what HERS is.
Okay.
But low is better than high.
Okay, lowest, it's you want to get as low as possible if you want to be as efficient as possible.
Yeah, and it's the code, not the electrification ordinance, but the building code sets 52 as the standard for mixed fuel buildings, 55 for all electric. In other words, if you're all electric, you're treated more leniently, is really what that means.
Mr. Lee, do you wish to add anything at this point?
I think Ann covered all of the main points. I'm afraid if I add more, I'll just confuse people for no reason, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, so I think I'd like to turn to members of the committee who have questions and then go to members of the council who are not on the committee. Let me start with Councilor Albright and go to Councilor Wright.
My question is, did anything in the ordinance need to change, or do we just now, once we understand what the state ruling is, the ordinance still works as it was passed some months ago?
I think we made trivial, non-substantive changes. Wouldn't you say that's true, Andrew?
That's true. Perhaps the only change that we made, again, came from an understanding from DOER, which was before we had operated under the understanding that the specialized code applies to major renovations, and the fact is that it doesn't. The specialized code really only applies to new construction. So we had to change some of the language within the ordinance that talked about the specialized code applying to major renovations because it doesn't. Aside from those kind of, cleanup items, there was nothing of substance.
Yeah, nothing of substance.
Because there was no red line version of the code, so I guess we just have to take it on faith that it didn't change much.
Yeah, no. It's, I think you can trust us in that respect. In all respects.
Thank you.
Just again, for clarification of the public, Mr. Lee, you talked about the specialized code and the stretch code. Again, just for everybody's review, there's the basic building code, stretch code, specialized code, and then we have the electrification one. Can you just sort of summarize where we are in currently in Newton?
So in Newton, we've adopted both the stretch code and we also opted into the specialized code. So again, that's already in place. So then right now, as we sit here today, the specialized code, which is a higher standard of energy efficiency and kind of climate sustainable requirements, that currently exists and applies to new construction projects. The stretch code is also still in place and it applies to major renovation projects. And that's the HERS rating that Anne was just talking about earlier and explaining that a major renovation project, although it doesn't have to comply with the specialized code, it does have to comply with the stretch code, which again, that's the HERS rating that it needs to meet.
So that we currently have varying standards of energy efficiency, depending whether it's a substantial renovation or new construction, as I hear it.
That's
Right?
correct.
Even before
Yes,
we do anything.
that's
here.
right.
Okay.
I find it kind of interesting, maybe just because I'm sort of an energy nerd, but more than half, well, more than half, I wish I had the number at the top of my head, of communities in Massachusetts, cities and towns in Massachusetts have adopted the stretch code. I think over 100 communities have now adopted the stretch code. And over, I don't know, 40 or 50 have adopted the specialized code. So it's not a weird thing we're doing with respect to these codes.
Okay, all right, thank you. Councilor Albright, are you done?
I'm set.
Okay, Councilor Wright, I have you next, and then we'll see where we go.
Okay, I have a few questions. So how likely would let's say a pre-1940s house, they do a 1,200 square foot addition, but now the whole house has to meet the HERS rating? How likely will it, and what additional things would they need to do in order to meet that HERS rating?
So that's really a question for the commissioner of
ahead,
ISD,
Andrew.
but one thing I really want to emphasize here is that's not an electrification question, right? That's something that would have to be asked of any property that's doing an addition like that today, irrespective of the electrification ordinance, because the electrification ordinance isn't making up this substantial renovation standard. That's, again, how it exists today. If there's going to be a substantial renovation, an addition that meets that definition happening to the type of home you described, Council Wright, today, it would have to meet that HERS rating, regardless of what the city council did here tonight.
So what incorporated or what required us to meet the HERS rating? Which of those different things?
It would be the stretch code
That was the stretch code, okay.
that this city has already opted into.
So do you think there will need to be additional,
So let me just indicate who you're talking to, so the public will understand.
they can't see me?
We've been joined by the Commissioner of Inspectional Services, Mr. Ciccarelli, and we're delighted to have you here. Councilor Wright had a question for you, so just so you can indicate.
So do you think additional for an older home, additional things would need to be done in order to meet the HERS rating?
Absolutely.
And what kind of things would they need?
Uh,
Would they need new windows?
It could
probably?
be new windows, more insulation in the attic, more insulation in the walls, possibly continuous insulation on the outside of the building. Better appliances also help with HERS rating, high efficiency appliances. Things to that effect.
Okay. My next question,
Just to clarify, that's now the rule regardless of whether we
Yep.
do the
Yep. It
electrification.
has nothing to do with electrification.
Okay, just want to be clear what we're doing tonight versus what happens otherwise. Okay, thanks.
what's the definition of a low-rise residential building? or Ms. Berwick?
I might leave that to Mr. Chicarello.
Yeah,
actually.
so low-rise residential building is a residential building, uh, 3 stories or less.
That's it,
Yeah, pretty much.
okay.
Again, that already is a part of the current rules, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So one of the things I thought is historic buildings are exempted from some of these requirements, and I was wondering what and how is a historic building qualified as historic?
Commissioner?
If that's for me, it would be, they would have to apply through the historic part of the planning department, and see if the actual building has any historic significance or rating on it. And a letter would be given to the applicant from the historic.
And being on the National Registry would be
That-
fine?
That's again, the current rule, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
As if you were gonna be doing a renovation on a historic home, more than 50% of one side, you would have to go in front of the, well, it could be administratively approved, or in front of the historic commission to see if it does have any historic status to it.
But I thought also that you didn't have to meet the Hertz rating if it's deemed a historic building or something. I thought that was discussed a while ago and the state was gonna quantify that.
So Council Wright, it's a little bit more nuanced than that. So first, there's a question of what structures meet the historic or a historic building definition. And they do include properties that are on the National Register. They also include properties that are designated as historic under applicable state or local law, here being a purview of the NHC. And then in terms of the nuance of exactly what that exemption actually exempts is, it exempts requirements that more or less have any provisions that cause damage or would cause damage to the historic character of the building, right? So there needs to be some nexus between what exactly has to be done, for example, and not in every case, but for example, it could be, as the commissioner noted, the whole outside building envelope might need insulation to meet the HERS rating, and that's the only way you can do it. The historic exemption might certainly come into play if that would damage the historic character of the building. But things that are done internally, I don't believe really have any effect on it. It's all about the exterior architectural features.
Yeah, that's been my understanding as well. I think the issue has come up in the past as to whether the condenser for an air source heat pump, which is outside, is an issue in terms of destroying the historic character of the building. And I think there have been some rulings that if they're not on the street-facing portion of the building, the condenser isn't a problem. But as Mr. Lee said, that would, be up to the particular historic building commission's ruling.
Commissioner?
So typically that would be mainly for districts, historic districts being viewed from the street. But just historic homes not in districts, that wouldn't be the case.
Okay, great, thank you.
Are we discussing Bertle now or
No,
later?
we're just talking about electrification.
Okay, I'm done, thank you.
Okay. Any other members of the committee? Councilor Oliver.
Great, thank you, Chair. So, just for my clarification, like, the more I read about what's going on, not just here, but Massachusetts, the country, the globe, the more we're starting to hear about the grid, where it's at, what's got to happen in order for it to sustain everything that we're putting onto the grid, power we're looking to extract from the grid. And I'm just curious, and I don't know if these questions are actually answerable, frankly, or if perhaps it's just something we just acknowledge and say, hey, okay, yeah, this is out there. But I am curious, are we aware of any plans like that Massachusetts has, either in the near future or perhaps a couple of years on down the road, to make significant leaps with our grid here in this state, at least?
I'm
Yes.
really glad you asked.
That
Well,
purpose.
sorry, I'll let you finish.
Just
I-
to clarify, you want to just clarify what you mean by the grid in terms of electrical capacity or where the electricity comes from? What are you referring to, Councilman?
I'm talking about how the electricity is gonna get from source to our collective homes.
Okay. Right.
I'm really glad you're asking that question. It's an important one. Um, First of all, we're talking about new buildings and major renovations in Newton and at the moment 8 other communities. There isn't a 10th in the 10 communities program. And the state and Boston somehow agreed to exclude Boston. So there aren't any very large communities in this picture. So it's intended to be a pilot. It's not intended to be anywhere close to the whole state. It doesn't affect existing buildings. It's a small pilot. So I would say in terms of the capacity of the grid, this electrification ordinance is a relatively trivial issue. That said, both the country and Massachusetts are worrying about this issue. So FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, just a few weeks ago issued a rule requiring a 20-year planning horizon with a view towards taking into consideration the projected increase in electricity demand. And Governor Healy, about 8 months ago, set up a commission on clean energy infrastructure siting and permitting. I actually served on the practitioners advisory group to that commission. And so Massachusetts, and there will be, the administration is currently, just happen to know, the administration, because of my role in this, the administration is currently drafting legislation, as has Representative Jeff Roy drafted legislation. The two are going to have to be somehow integrated to deal with exactly this problem, which is strengthening the grid to allow for increased electricity demand. So it is an issue, but it's certainly not one that's being ignored at any level, state or federal.
So I just want to make sure, Councilor Oliver, and I do want to recognize Councilor Getz, who's a member of the committee and spoken, but I'll come back.
Oh, I wanted to address that one.
Okay, you mean to follow on to this question?
No, actually, just an answer to that.
Oh,
So just today in the Washington Post, which I want to dig in further, they had an article on just this. And what some scientists seeing as a somewhat simpler approach is our high voltage wires are 50, 100-year-old technology, and replacing the wires. And right now with the copper, and that produces a lot of heat and you have a lot of loss, and using much newer technology to replace those wires, you can increase the amount of electricity going on the wires. So, and the infrastructure is in place, it's just rewiring that with better technology. So there's some hope, and it's just initial article, I'm gonna dig into it a little bit more, but it's the first I heard of it and sounds good.
Yeah, that's a very important point. I mean, there are a lot of things that are underway that are going to address this question. One is rewiring of the grid. Another is a very substantial addition of offshore wind. Another is changing of the siting and permitting rules, which is the subject of the governor's commission on the topic. So I could keep going, but.
Oliver, is that responsive?
Yeah, no, that's great. I'd like to hear from Councilor Getz and
Okay.
too on this.
All right.
Assuming it's the same topic.
Yeah, and then Councilor Leary, I'll get to you. So, Councilor Getz,
Yeah, no, I just have a quick question for the commissioner. Just in the memo itself, it had an important note number 2. And I am, I may be mixing things here, but it's talking about the HERS ratings. for residential buildings, but it's also saying that the electrification ordinance has no effect on the HERS rating. And that the required HERS rating is 52 for a residential building that uses both fossil fuels and electricity as a fuel source. So it's a mixed fuel building. And then it goes on to say that the required HERS rating is 55 for the residential building, that it's all electric. So I'm a little bit confused here because I would think that if you electrify, you would have an impact on the overall HERS building rating. And so one would hope that you'd be wanting to do that. Can you explain
Yeah.
that a little bit to
I
me?
mean, you
It's-
picked up on a very nuanced point that I intended to correct in a revision of this memo,
Okay.
which
Okay.
is that I think frankly that I misstated it. The HERS standard wouldn't change, but you see what I'm saying?
Yep.
So if you have a mixed fuel building, it's still going to be a 52 standard, a HERS 52 standard, but it may help you reach that standard that you put in all electric appliances. And thank you for picking that up. It's a very nuanced point, and I need to correct that in the memo.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Councilor Malachi? And then-
Have you taken care of all the committee people already?
I'm not done.
Oh, no.
She's on the same topic.
Oh, okay. If this is on the same topic, I thought, excuse me, Councilor, I thought you finished, but you're not okay. Councilor Malachi, do you mind if I let Councilor Oliver finish up?
Not at all.
So I thought we were gonna stick to that, topic.
Yeah.
And.
Yeah, I'm gonna get-
Topic is something, so you'll
We'll get there.
pay attention.
We'll get
Okay.
there.
All right, and I do have a couple of questions that kind of, I'm just curious what what work we may have done on this topic, and I apologize. I may not have picked this up from last year's or last session's conversations. But I am curious, how are we as a city, like, what do we think? Should we pass this ordinance as it's written? What do you think what impact might this have on new development, renovations in the city? At what point do the costs of a renovation, a major renovation, effectively steer a homeowner away from a renovation and into a tear down and a rebuild? And I'm just like, I'm curious, because those are topics they're all interrelated, and we're adding a new dimension to that conversation. And I'm just curious if that was discussed either last time around, or if there's been homework done on that to kind of, I don't know, kind of get a gauge on that activity, or that change.
Well, it's a big question, right? I mean, first of all, let me deal with it in the context of new construction. And, there are a lot of not a lot, there are a number of studies on this, but I think people who have looked at them closely would conclude that for new construction, building all electric is at cost parity, basically, with conventional building, that there isn't anything like that they're relatively comparable for new construction. And I think additions are, well, it depends what kind of addition we're talking about. If it's internal to the building, it's kind of as a major renovation. If it's an addition that's not internal to the building, then it would be new construction, same deal, relatively cost parity. For major renovations, so essentially retrofits, I think there is, I don't want to pretend that there is no cost adder for an electric retrofit. But of course, we're going to be headed in the direction of everything needing to be electric within the next I don't know, I don't want to say how many years, but we can't continue to use fossil fuels. So to do something major to your house that adds fossil fuel use isn't a wise choice. But I don't know, probably others, Mr. Ciccarello or Mr. Lee, want to pipe in on this.
The
Or-
energy code is what's tripping everything into the costs for the HERS rating for renovations, basically. New buildings, again, the energy code takes care of it. The electrification, to me, just seems to want to convert what would have been maybe a fossil fuel heating system for a particular addition. You're now going to use a mini split to heat it. So really, the electrification really doesn't do anything for, or do anything that would increase costs. To me, it's already being done by the energy code and the specialized code in the stretch energy code.
Got it. Okay, the last question I have is just in two pieces, and that is, how are we gonna help homeowners and contractors? I think those are the two primary targets here. How are we gonna help them understand how to comply? What puts them in, what is a major renovation, for example, would be one of the questions that is out there. What are we gonna create some little video vignette things to help people understand? Are we gonna create publications? I wanna make sure that people understand, because I don't know how many other people here got a bunch of phone calls and emails. Like, what do you mean you're gonna take away my gas stove? What do you mean, if I replace the windows in my house, I've gotta put in an electric stove, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The questions are out there. And it's gonna be incumbent upon us to kind of, help people understand what is and what isn't accurate.
Those last year. We got those questions last
I'm
year.
sure, yeah, of course,
Years
right?
ago.
Yeah.
Is this for the commissioner, I guess?
Yeah, I'm not sure who the best.
Yeah, I mean, the electrification isn't gonna be, it doesn't do those things. So if you're not doing a major renovation or an addition of greater than 1,000 square feet, okay, it's not gonna make a difference whether you wanna put in a gas stove or an electric stove. However, if you wanted to do a 1,000 square foot addition, okay, everything in that kitchen would have to be electric. So if you had a gas stove, it would now be electric. The water, the heating of the water for that kitchen sink, dishwasher, again, would have to be electric, even if you had a gas hot water heater already. Okay, so you'd have to make, you'd have to put a different system in just for that particular addition. Yeah, I mean,
But I'm wondering,
a window renovation or changing the windows is not gonna trigger
right,
electrification.
so how are we gonna help everyone in Newton who's gonna replace their windows know that? That's really the core of my question. And we don't need a finite answer right now, but I just wanna make sure that we have a plan in mind, leading up to this.
The way I look at it is that, I mean, we get the questions at ISD and we assist the public the best we can with answers for them.
Excuse me if I can just interject, though. I think what you've done collectively with Ms. Berwick is give some examples. And some of these examples are things that are part of the electrification, but also inform what also is required, even if we don't do that. And I guess the request I'm hearing from the vice chair is that to the extent that the department can create some materials or other information on the website that will guide people through this, so that the time you spend at the counter or otherwise with your inspectors doing the same, answering the same question over and over again, it will make life simpler for you and simpler for the public. So I guess the question is, does the administration have a plan, whether this ordinance passes or not, but because these are still relatively new to a number of people, of some examples and building on the kind of materials we've had here for the committee, so that the public will be well informed as best we can. That you have.
Can I just pitch in on this?
No,
I think you're asking a really important question, that relates not primarily to the electrification ordinance, but simply to implementation of the building codes. And I feel like they sort of have to be geniuses in ISD. I mean, the building codes are extraordinarily complicated. I am certainly not an expert on them. But ISD has to be prepared, and contractors have to learn. ISD has to be prepared to answer questions about what the actual requirements are. And that is a complicated undertaking to do with the bathing code, and now the stretch code and the specialized code does not really primarily have to do with the electrification ordinance.
understood, but I guess the point in general is that the more information that can be made available in advance, as opposed to individual questions, the more time with everyone will be saved.
Right.
And I guess you would like to,
Well, the idea, the broader idea is self-service is helpful to the public and your team. If you can get rid of 70, 80, 90% of the questions by creating a 5-minute video, a 4-page flyer, whatever it might be, right? So that people can kind of go and find their answer in an FAQ-like document. The questions you're gonna be, and that you're gonna end up with are gonna be the super finite, hey, I see these two things, they contradict each other in my mind, help me figure it out. As opposed to the other 80% of the, you know, if I replace my windows, is that a major renovation type question?
I see what you're saying. More so that, you know, what type of renovation is gonna trigger it.
As a big example, like there's a big pool there.
Yeah. So, keep in mind too, when the owners or the residents want to do work on their houses, typically 95% of them have licensed general contractors who are supposed to be aware of the code, the current codes, and should guide their customers, say, to, you know, what is required and what couldn't be done.
well, I think that's true. I just want to interject. I think you're hearing from a member of the committee and implicitly from others, and that to the extent the administration can do anything beyond and above relying on contractors and your own staff on site to inform people about these still relatively new code requirements for a lot of people. And I think it will be a benefit. And without getting into how that's done at this stage, I hear a request that you consider doing something along those lines.
Okay.
Is that fair?
Sure.
Okay, I just want to keep track of the people who ask questions. Now, are you done?
I've only got 8 more questions. I'm good. I'm just kidding. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, because I'm trying to take care of people in the committee, and then I'll come back to people not in the committee, but I've now got Councilor Danberg to add to the list, and Councilor Krinsman. So let me go to Councilor Krinsman. I'll come back to Councilor Albright, and then we'll go outside the committee. So Councilor Danberg.
Danberg or Krinsman?
I'm sorry. No, you put your hand up first
Okay.
before I saw his. So.
I'll go, thank you. Just to add to that, last conversation that we had, generally, if you change the windows in your house, or you want to do something electrical or something plumbing, your contractor or your plumber or your electrician will pull a permit, and know, when he or she goes to the counter, if they have any questions on it, the counter will be able to answer those questions. So I think while it's a good idea to try and get the word out, as John was suggesting, and I think it's a good idea to have something like an FAQ, where you can preempt a lot of the questions on this. And you can have them there at the counter for people to take with them. But I think that ultimately, as Mr. Ciccarello said, most, the 95% or whatever that high percentage is of the people who come to have something done in their home, have a contractor, an electrician, or a plumber that would take care of that piece of it. My question is, under low-rise buildings,
Would you just indicate what you're referring to and who your
yes,
question
I'm
is to?
referring to the memo that was put out by Dr. Berwick. On page 2, low-rise buildings, it says that the new HERS standard for mixed fuel buildings is 52. Mixed fuel with solar is 55, and all electric with solar is 58. First of all, mixed fuel, does that mean no electric?
No, it means any fossil fuel being used in the building. So, you know, a gas dryer, gas stove. It's any fossil fuel in the building. If it's not entirely electric, it's mixed.
Okay. And the difference is 52 for mixed fuel and then 55 for mixed fuel with solar or all electric. That, that standard is a higher number a better number, or a lower number a better number here? Just
Lower number is better.
lower number is better. So could you just explain to those of us who are a little bit confused about the higher numbers for all electric, why the higher number is why the all electric with solar is a higher number than the mixed fuel? What's the logic behind that?
Wait a second, could you just read me again? The 52 is,
52 is mixed fuel, 55 is mixed fuel with solar or all electric, and 58 is all electric with solar. So the more compliant you
oh
are,
yeah,
the lower
okay.
your rating, the higher your rating is, and lower ratings are better. I just, that doesn't make.
Right. So what it means is what it means is if you do all the good stuff, right, progressive stuff, electric and solar, you are treated more leniently with respect to, say, insulation or windows. So you don't have to do, or you have to do a little less, not a lot, but you have to do a little less if you're doing all this other stuff that we want you to do, like electric, solar. And again, I just want to say this has nothing to do with the electrification ordinance, okay? But Mr. Ciccarello, do you think that's a fair explanation?
Yes, they give you more incentives if you're gonna be all electric than you would if you were a mixed fuel building. Therefore, that's why the HERS rater is a little bit higher for an all electric with solar.
Oh, I get that now. Thank you. That answers.
Yeah, you have more wiggle room essentially if you're doing this other electric or solar stuff.
Thank you.
We can have a somewhat leakier window, right, if you use an all electric appliance,
Got
all right?
I mean, in some important sense, it doesn't make sense, I have to say. But again, this is not about the electrification ordinance, right? Because you don't, if you're going to electrify your home, you don't want it to be as leaky as possible, right? Because then you're going to have to oversize your electric equipment. So we never want to discourage energy efficiency. So, but anyway, the way we answered your question, I think is correct in terms of the theory of the building code.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Okay, so I want to go to Councillor Krinsman, and then I go to Councillor Albright, and then Councillor Leary. Councillor Krinsman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to ask, I guess, Ms. Berwick about discussions that happened. My recollection of when we discussed this a couple times was to the point Councillor Oliver was making, that we talked about stoves and we talked about individuals potentially wanting to keep their stoves. We talked about renovations and what's impacted by it. I don't recall us discussing commercial stoves, and I'm inquiring about whether the committee, whether you all discussed commercial impacts to restaurants, and if, you know, a major renovation for a restaurant was going to be put in, would they have to then use electric stoves? And is that going to discourage restaurants from coming in?
So that's, now that's with the electrification ordinance or under the current code, Counselor, just so we understand.
With the electrification ordinance.
So once again, this is kind of a nuanced question, and I'll tell you why. So if you forget about the exemptions in the ordinance for a moment, the electrification ordinance would say if you're a restaurant and you do, well, if you're building a new restaurant, it's got to be all electric, right? But if you do a major renovation in a restaurant, and let's assume it's not just that you added a whole bunch of seating, a very large amount of seating space, right? Let's assume it actually, your major renovation actually had something to do with the kitchen.
Right. I mean,
Then-
I'm thinking most restaurants that come in and take over a space usually do a major renovation to set up their own
Yeah,
operation.
okay. So it's a major renovation, includes the kitchen, they'd have to
Right.
use an electric stove. What makes this, and so that's the answer, sort of broadly speaking. But there is a sort of nuance to this, which is there's an exemption in the ordinance that was okayed by DUER for what's called, I have to look at, it's called process, hold on one second. We called it process load, I think. Yeah, process load. And so all of the 9 communities, we were talking, not all of them, but we were talking to each other and we were like, what is process load anyway? And then for a restaurant, I think here's what we concluded that it was. It's like if you have a pizza oven that you really want to use gas for, is that considered something that isn't integral, I guess, to the building, so that it wouldn't typically be in the building code? It's just about your pizza oven. Anyway, none of us were really sure what it referred to, process load. And some of us, some of the cities and towns just decided to create an exemption for it. We said, we don't know exactly what it is, but we're going to say it's okay if you want to do it. And somewhat to my surprise, frankly, the DOER said that was all right. So we have exempted process loads. That means you can use your gas in your pizza oven. But
So you're talking about the 8th exemption under the list of exemptions, right? That talks about process loads potentially for commercial purposes. So
Yeah.
this is an exemption, and I think what you're explaining is that if it's a stove that's important to the building or integral to the functioning of the commercial establishment, I mean, if we know, is that just does one sort of apply to Mr. Ciccarello? Does one need approval of that exemption from the commissioner? Is that how that works? Or is it just an assumption that I know because I'm building a pizza oven, I can put that in?
Is this directed at me, Counselor?
Oh, whoever can answer it, absolutely.
I don't know for sure. The exemption for things like that, I'm not sure how it would come across. I mean, if they
Okay.
would write me a letter, but again, not knowing a lot about what restaurants need for their uses as far as what they want to cook, makes it a little difficult for me to, decide whether these are a legitimate exemption.
Well, I mean, that's exactly what I'm thinking is I'm wondering, usually to apply an exemption, Mr. Ciccarello, you would need a standard. You would need to know what's the standard, how do I apply it so that I can just sort of call balls and strikes, right? It's not necessarily do I think this is an important pizza oven, right? We're not looking to put that onus on you. So that's why I'm sort of wondering how this works, because again, I think many of us have been concerned about the restaurant industry. Many of us have been concerned about certainly restaurants in and around Newton. And so I'm just thinking about that as we're evaluating this. So I appreciate the answers. And thank you.
Let me just, I don't know if this really helps, but at least my theory, and I think Mr. Lee's, but I don't want to speak for him, theory in drafting this ordinance was let's not make the perfect the enemy of the good. So if we end up with 4 pizza ovens or whatever, in the city of Newton, but all other new construction is now all electric. I think I don't really care about the 4 pizza ovens, right? Let's get 99% of the problem under control. I mean, that was my theory in writing the ordinance, and apparently DOER agreed with it.
So just to put a frame around that, Ms. Berwick, as we understand it, there is an exemption opportunity for a specific kind of need that might not fit within the general electrification model. If that can be established to the commissioner's satisfaction, the ordinance will allow that. Is that a fair summary?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Just want to be clear on what the.
I mean, at the end of the day, you know, and it's not, again, it's not just a question of the electrification ordinance. Mr. Ciccarello and his staff have a very hard job. At the end of the day, they have to interpret the building codes.
But this is a part of the building code as well.
Yes, it is. And yes, it is.
Okay. Just again, I want to keep track of my list of people. I have Councillor Leary, then Councillor Maliki, and then come back into Councillor Albright in committee. Councillor Leary.
Thank you very much,
And we're so glad you're here.
Chair. Yeah, I'm pleased to be here. I just wanted to respond to some of the things I've been hearing. One of them was Councillor Oliver's concerns about, you know, making sure that Newton residents are aware of this going on. And our energy coach is here, Leora Silks, and I was wondering if ISD would be coordinating more with our energy coach. Would her role be expanded? I mean, I think there's opportunity there to help with some of the concerns that came up regarding getting the word out and being able to educate and provide information to Newton residents, which we've already been doing. I'm aware of that, but I just wanted to throw that out. You can respond to it, or it can be something that we can discuss another time.
I mean, I'm always up for helping and trying to get, you know, notices out or
Right.
put literature up at the counter for residents to, you know, see if they're walking by or even if they had questions, we could, you know, either direct them to show them where this literature would be if it's on the table
Right.
behind them.
But I thought that Leora could also sort of, as we get by right permits coming in, that she could engage them early on in the process towards get away from gas and onto electrification, which they're gonna have to do now as we, I'm sure this will.
Maybe I could pitch in on that. So it's funny you raised that, Councillor Leary, because Leora and I just today scheduled a meeting with Mr. Ciccarello for next Wednesday. And that's part of to talk about kind of the overlap in our work. And that's part of a larger enterprise of the sustainability and energy team and maybe we'll get more into this in the last item on the agenda, but want to work with all of the departments to figure out how we can, maybe I should say infiltrate, but I've been advised not to use that word, sort of integrate concerns about energy and climate into everything we do as a city.
Okay, thank you. I have another question.
If I could jump in briefly just to say, hello, this is Leora Silks, who we were talking about. I'm the energy coach. And yeah, I often do end up talking to people who are starting big projects. Right, I am not as really involved, that is in the world of inspectional services, to have projects actually move through the process when they are getting the permits. So I am not involved in things moving through at a by right pace. But I am absolutely there to speak with anyone at any point of the process if they would like to do so. And then certainly involved in a number of outreach efforts to make sure that people are aware that this resource exists and that, you know, we, as the other questions have been raised about, do people understand if they replace their windows, is that going to trigger something else in their house? Those are conversations that I have fairly frequently.
Okay, thank you very much. My other point, which was also raised by Councillor Oliver, was concerns about the hardening of the grid or the stress on the grid. But I wanted to bring up another part of that as we look into the future. And that is the cost of natural gas, which is predicted to increase significantly, in fact. And also the concerns about a stranded asset and fewer gas companies carrying a larger burden. I think that's something we have to acknowledge as well, how the future will change, how our energy choices will start to evolve. And there was a comment from the last time I think when we had the public hearing back in February, that I wrote down because I thought it was really important. Why continue to invest in multiple energy distribution systems when modern technology enables an electric system to carry the load that has been served by the gas system as well? So there would also be those kinds of cost savings in terms of what infrastructure are we going to invest in, and helping to reduce costs for a fuel system that is gradually being phased out, and things could change pretty dramatically. And I didn't know, Ms. Berwick, if you wanted to comment any more on that, or if there's other information about it or something that I've missed that might be helpful to the committee.
Well, I mean, I guess I would just say in that regard, you know, the world is changing and we have to move to decarbonize the economy. And so we're just nudging people along in that regard so that they don't do something new, a major renovation or build a new building that uses an approach that we have to be eliminating, that is the use of fossil fuels.
Right. And my other point also was how critically important energy efficiency is.
Yeah.
Because we really have to reduce the energy we use in order to really meet our goals. And we can't lose sight of that. The other thing, Ms. Berwick, when you were, which I think, I'm not sure if everyone fully understands, certainly I don't think all the public does, about the many opportunities there are to meet the energy code standards. And it came up with Councilor Danberg's discussion we just had on the HERS rating. And I think that was very helpful because I was a little confused about the HERS rating going up for all electric buildings versus mixed fuel, and you just explained that. But it would be really important for when we come to the public hearing that the members of the public understand the different ways they can better meet the HERS rating. I know we're talking about the electrification ordinance today too, but they kind of all work together in a way, right?
Yeah.
That the fact that if you have mixed fuel and you add solar, how that can help you also, you know, make more progress on reducing your carbon footprint. And that may be for another discussion, but I think there's more, it would be helpful to have a deeper dive into that for not only for the council, but for members of the public especially. And then that doesn't have to be discussed right now. We did touch on it.
Well, if I can just summarize what I think you're saying, and we've heard in committee, again, anything that can be done in advance to educate the public about what the nature of the current rules are, and then what the new rules would do, so they don't have to answer every individual question. It's going to save everybody time. I mean, that's the thrust of what everybody's arguing. And I hope the administration is hearing that loud and clear. Okay, so I do want to get to Councilor Maliki, who's been very patient. Her electronic hand has been up for some time. You must be getting tired, but I want to welcome you. And I just want to say that, again, tonight, the conversation is with the council and the city staff who are here. We'll have an opportunity for public comment next meeting on the 10th. Councilor Maliki.
Thank you. And my electronic hand is using no energy, I believe. Kristen, okay. Is our definition of major renovation exactly the same as the state's?
Yes, it comes from the state code.
Comes from the states. Okay. And is that visible on our website now in an easy to find way?
I mean, the definition of major renovation?
Right.
Is it, I'm not sure anything is easy to find on our website.
Good point. But is it findable somehow on the website? Because is it the same definition of major renovation that I believe kicks in a requirement to put in new water and sewer? Is it related to that trigger?
So can I speak to this,
The ordinance.
Yeah, Mr. Lee.
Mr. Chair? So I think it's really important to emphasize this definition of major renovation. This isn't a homegrown definition. It's not a Newton definition. This is from the state building code. It's a
Okay,
state, so that's really what it is. In fact, the model that was provided by DOER was a little bit less helpful because all it did was reference the state building code to specific provisions of it. So that's where it came from, and that's what the standard is.
okay. And I once tried to find something in the state building code and it was incomprehensible because it kicks you to the national building code or God knows what. Okay, so in the, so is there a place on the city website now, or can there be one soon that explains what a major renovation is?
Maybe Leora, do you want to speak to the city website and what's at least on the sustainability and energy portions? We have a lot of.
I think that is a wonderful idea to make that more clear. We have some information currently about, which is in some of the memos that have been delivered to ZAP and in Friday packets about certain types of renovation. But I think there's more that we could do to make that very clear, and that could live perhaps in the climate initiatives website, or we can work with Commissioner Tigrello about connecting to some of the inspectional services information as well.
Okay, because I'm just thinking of people who, you know, they want a slightly bigger house, but they don't want to find out, you know, 6 months down the road that what they've envisioned is going to trigger a second heating system or something like that. So just to have, for people to be able to figure out at the outset what scale of thing they might want to do, and you know, it might affect their choice of architect or whatever, just have that really clear. And in the memo, you have major renovations defined as, and it appears there's like 3 different things that would be categorized as a major renovation. Additions over 1,000 square feet, that's enough by itself to be a major renovation, right? Or greater than 100% of conditioned floor area of an existing building. So that would be an addition greater than 100% of conditioned floor area, and in fact, doubling the size of a house.
So I'm looking at the definitions. So what's your question exactly?
I'm
again?
just trying to break kind of deconstruct this sentence.
Yeah. So there are actually 4, and this comes directly from the state building code. So there's something, a piece, and again, we didn't make this up, that there's something every time I read it that I sort of want to call people's attention to.
I want to put that greater than 1,000 square feet inside the parentheses. Is that what you're talking about?
No, actually.
I'll get to that. All right.
If look at A, it says over 1,000 square feet.
So the public will understand what you're talking about.
So this is page in the backup to the, it looks to be page 4 of the ZAP agenda with the backup from the Friday packet. So page 4 of that.
I'm actually looking at the ordinance itself.
Oh,
The ordinance or Ms. Berwick's memo, Councilor Maliki.
I'm looking at it kind of follows the examples business. So I believe that is Ms. Berwick's memo, which memorandum, yes. The from Ann Berwick, yes.
Well, it should be identical because it's lifted from the building code.
Okay.
From state directly from state regulations. And so the part I always want to point out to people is, you see where it says low rise residential additions over 1,000 square feet, and additions exceeding 100% of the conditioned floor area of the existing dwelling unit. So that's disjunctive. Either one
Right.
qualifies as a major renovation. And then if you look at C, which says level 3 alterations, so that's exceeding 50% of the existing conditioned floor area, exceeding 1,000 square feet. So that's conjunctive, not disjunctive. And to me, when I read that, that always is confusing. So in the instance of A, either one will do it. In the
Right.
instance of C, you need both. And that's not the way I would have written it if I were writing the building code, but I didn't write the building code. You can't accuse me of writing the building code.
So that's state language, and I agree
That
that,
is state language, and
Very
I
confusing.
don't like it, but it is state language.
so maybe in a,
Let us be clear that the state language to which you refer is in the building code now.
Yes,
And this is not adding any new
that's
level. of
right.
confusion.
That's right.
Confusion is already there.
Yes.
it
Part of
seems
the
like we need
challenge
to interpret the building code for people who,
There is a clear need, as we've been talking about for the last few minutes, to educate the public and their professionals about the requirements of our existing code, much less what we do with the electrification ordinance. And I think, Commissioner?
Just keep in mind, what we're talking about here is in the energy code portion of the building code. Okay, where the additions over 1,000 square feet or greater than 100% of the conditioned floor area is in the energy code. There are several codes that all interact with the building code. So, just a little point of information.
Yeah, that's
What you would
helpful.
find-
And
Yeah, where you would find what Ian was talking about as a substantial renovation, that is in the building code portion, where, you know, the total area of all the work areas included in the alteration exceeds 50% of the area of the dwelling unit. That's right out of the building code. So it's in different places and can be confusing on where to look.
and you just used the word substantial, but
Yeah.
did you mean major?
Well, it's substantial, they use extensive alterations, level 3 alterations, they all pretty much mean the same thing, but they're in different parts of the code.
Okay, all right. I think it would be helpful when we have the place on the website where people can go to sort of understand it in plain English. It would be helpful to say A, B, and C making clear that level 3 alterations means an
Yeah.
alteration that consumes over 50% of existing condition area and is greater than 1,000
Yeah.
square feet. I think that and 1,000 square feet should have
Yeah.
been inside their parentheses.
yeah,
So
I
for
mean,
example, oh, sorry.
you're absolutely right. And but again, since we're talking about the electrification ordinance, and that's what you're gonna have to act on, is that this isn't just the electrification ordinance. This is in the state regulations.
Yeah, but we're trying to help people understand what
Right, I
they
got
would
it.
do trigger electrification and to what degree. So for example, if you've got a, say, 1.5-story building, you're gonna relay out, break down walls, rearrange walls or whatever, open floor plan, the whole first floor. So that's more than 50% of the conditioned floor area, assuming basement is not. So that would be a major renovation, even if you're not adding, or no, that would not be a major renovation because you're not adding 1,000 square feet.
Councilor Maliki, I'm going to suggest that that's a kind of question again that it's hard to answer in this context. What we're trying to do is to say, for purposes of our colleagues and the committee report, we have to decide whether to recommend to our colleagues that we adopt the electrification ordinance. What you've described are thresholds that are built into the existing rules that we have in the city. Having those clarified, regardless of what we do with electrification, is going to be an important opportunity for the city. But I guess what I'm asking is, there some specific aspect of electrification, the ordinance, that you want to be clarified?
Okay, I guess on the earlier attempt at this, I think we were told that adopting the electrification, we're talking 10 communities now, right? That would not really do anything beyond having adopted the specialized stretch code, because we didn't really understand the specialized stretch code did not apply to major renovations back then. With it, knowing what we know now, what is the major difference between adopting 10 communities and where we are now?
So that's basically the question before the committee, and what we understand, Ms. Berwick has indicated, is that if you did things in the past and you do them today, you have a certain level of renovation or certain new construction that's going to be required. The electrification ordinance adds to that, that the new construction be all electric and that the major renovation be all electric. But as I understand it from Ms. Berwick's presentation in the memo, what you've got in the building now can stay in the same energy source it is, but there is an overall score that the total building has to meet in terms of energy conservation, which is the point that Councilor Leary mentioned was so important to keep in mind. So I think it's, I don't want us to get too wound up in what the current rules are, because I think they're important to understand, but we're really asking, should we take this additional step of saying that if you're doing new work or a substantial renovation, that the new work and the substantial renovation should be electric? That's basically what I'm understanding the ordinance.
Yeah.
for.
Yeah, can I pipe up on this?
Yes, please.
Chair Baker? So I want to be really clear that I am a strong proponent of this electrification ordinance. So the reason we have the ordinance at all, and let me clarify its relationship to 10 communities. Will that be helpful, Councilor Malik?
Well, I don't want to, the 10 communities was how we got here, but I
Right.
think for purposes of our conversation in committee, we want to be clear to our colleagues what we're asking the council to do, and that is to adopt this ordinance, which does not modify the existing rules. It adds to them in the context of electrification, right?
That's-
And so that's what
That's,
you're going through.
that's fair. The 10 communities program is what is allowing us to do this ordinance.
Mhm.
Because we don't have home rule authority, we needed the state to say, yes, you can require this electrification of new stuff. And so we are one of the ultimately 10 communities that will have the authority to require this electrification.
So
And-
the specialized
Like-
stretch code, I'm sorry.
And as I've said, I think it's really, well, you've heard my perspective is that it's important that we do that.
So the specialized stretch code that we've already adopted does not require new construction to be all electric.
That's absolutely right.
Okay, got it. Okay. That helps a lot.
What you're basically voting for is that all new construction in of a certain size be all electric.
Okay,
The stretch code and the specialized code offer inducements to electrification by virtue of the difference in the HERS ratings, right? But they never require electrification.
great.
Okay,
That helps a lot. Thank you.
Okay, good.
so I think that's where we are. Any other questions from members of the council or committee? I'm sorry, Councilor Albright, I didn't forget.
I only have a question, but when the issue of teaching people about the changes came up, I just Googled webinars, because I know there were at one point a lot of webinars on the new building code, and there still are a lot of webinars on the new building. Mass Save has a schedule between now and December of various aspects of the new building code. So you can send people to Mass Save and any number of other organizations that are doing webinars. I think it's kind of complicated to ask you to teach people about the new building code,
It's very difficult.
but you can point people to these various webinars.
Yes. I mean, we have to take them, just to, keep our credits up for, to be still certified by the state. Webinars are a lot easier for the public to watch if they really want to sit through one of those. It might be more confusing than not, but, it depends.
What worries me is how will people know about the electrification piece?
A lot of it is through word of mouth and through interaction with the building department.
Do we have all the names of all the contractors and architects that have come in for building permits? Do we have a list of email?
No.
We don't.
No, because we do not recommend throughout the, so.
I think what Councilor Albright is asking, if you wanted to pull together kind of a mailing list, saying, you know, you've been in front of the city building department, I mean, the inspectional service department the last 3 years for X or Y.
Mhm.
We just want you to know that if you're thinking of doing Z, we've got this new rule. Come see us and talk about it.
We
That's
do
all.
have on the IC website, all about the energy requirements of what is being required now. And it's been up there for the better part of the year. So if residents want to go to the IC website and look at what we have here, what the requirements are. I don't know exactly verbatim what's on there, if the, extensive renovation description is on there, or level 3 renovation is. I will check and I will see if we can have that added.
Yeah, I'm most worried about, like me, but I'm worried about the contractor that I might hire,
Mhm.
not knowing.
Mhm.
And then they give me a price and the price is wrong because they didn't realize we had an.
I think-
I mean, it makes it very difficult for us to police in a way, because again,
No, it's not I don't want you to police anything. I want you to let people know. Find a way to let these people know that there is now this electrification ordinance. And whatever way we can manage to let people know would be what I'd be asking you to do.
right, and I'll look into it some more, but I know we've been trying to give as much information about this, this is more about the energy code of what you're talking about here, as opposed to the electrification.
No, I'm actually talking about the electrification piece of it, because I would assume everybody knows there's a new building code that they have to deal with, but what they might not know is that we've added on this electrification piece.
Right, but I don't want to put anything on there until it's actually voted in.
Right.
No,
Of course, of
Oh, yeah.
course.
But I think, Commissioner, the general thrust is that to the extent that the building community can be actively advised that once we do something, that it has been done, not just that they can find something, but tell them, go look at it, you know? Councilor Wright?
So a recorded message, I mean, you got their phone numbers and then maybe you got emails too. And it'll take a little bit of time, but you make a recorded message and you just blast it out to everyone. Or the same with the email.
Put a banner over the counter.
Well, you want to tell them beforehand, because I can see if
Yeah.
someone doesn't do that much work here all the time, they don't know that we're part of that. And you get one quote and then they come back and you're like, oh my God, you
Yeah, they'll
know?
give you the quote before they go to
Where
the,
they know
Yeah,
that they have.
before they go to the counter.
Yeah.
Right,
So
well,
maybe
So
we can let
you
people-
basically want somebody to have a sign like a sandwich board that says, ask me about the new electrification ordinance, you know? Or it's
I mean, or
electronic.
a reverse 911 call.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, I think that's what you're.
Yes,
asking.
that's what it takes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, the administration has been good about advising people from time to time when things have changed. And the planning director, yes.
Yeah,
Steve?
just real quickly, Anthony's no stranger to having new rules that have to be enforced. I think word travels pretty quickly among the professionals about this, and this will get attention both from the mayor's newsletter and from other news sources that I'm pretty confident most folks will know about this. We can certainly explore other ways to get the word out. But if even the new gov site could have something on it, some sort of a banner that pops up for people so that they're aware of the new rule that's engaged.
When you probably more on the ISD homepage for maybe on NewGov, but again, that's when they'd be applying for the permit, which means they would have already
Right.
talked to somebody, you know, a contractor about what type of work. And this is where the contractors are supposed to be educated through their continuing ed credits that they have to take every year. So to let their customer know what is required and what might be needed. Again, energy code, but again, for electrification, that's a different thing altogether. Right? You can see.
Let us presume that the administration is getting the message to be active about informing the affected public about what changes are. We still have this committee to decide what to do. So I want to come back and just see the will of the committee on the electrification. We're not talking about Berto yet, we're not talking about climate, but I'm just interested in where the committee is. Do you want to act on this tonight, wait until we hear from the public? What's your
So
preference?
we passed this once. Did we rescind that vote or?
No, what we passed was essentially not an ordinance. We passed an endorsement of a version of the ordinance, which is very close to what we have before us. But it was not making the ordinance effective. We didn't have as Ms. Berwick has indicated, the building code is something that any city or town can't unilaterally change. What we have here is permission from the state through the Department of Energy Resources to make a change to our code that is not statewide, but because we think it is in the public interest to do that. So that's really what we're now doing, which is to make this legally effective, not just a policy choice that we thought was a good idea before.
So is this going on the 10th for public comment or? are we done
Well,
with
that's what
that?
I'm trying to discuss right now, where we want to go as committee. We could, as a committee, say, we've now asked all the questions we want to ask. And we're prepared to recommend to our colleagues to pass the electrification ordinance as is prepared and submitted to us.
Well, I'm
Or we could,
prepared.
no, let me just finish.
Yeah.
Or we could say, we've now explored as much as we can among ourselves. We would like to hear from the public as part of this public comment period we're going to have on the 10th. We were going to do that for Berto. We can also do it for the electrification ordinance. But I want to be clear that they're two different things, and I don't want to get them mixed up because they are easy to get mixed up. And I would like us to try and, if the committee is comfortable with it, move this piece along because we've seen this before. And certainly if, because we're coming up on the summer break, I think it's important that if we can do this, we do it before the break hits.
I'm ready to move.
Okay, let me just see, there's somebody got a hand up. Councilor Gentile, welcome. Councilor Gentile has joined us, and also I thought we saw Councilor Kelly. Yes, I didn't recognize you earlier, Councilor Kelly. Welcome. Councilor Gentile?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was a little late to the meeting and I don't want to hold up your proceedings, but I was going to ask if in fact the process was that you were wrapping up what you think is the best version of the ordinance in order for there to be a public hearing, which I was pretty comfortable with because I had a couple of areas that I wanted to bring up, but I was perfectly happy to wait until you heard from the public before I brought stuff up. So I'm curious as to what your decision's going to be.
Urge you to offer your questions tonight yourself, because I'd like to reserve the public comment for the public as much as possible.
No, I was going to do the same thing, but then I figured once you heard from the public, you were going to bring it back into committee and, for a final version. So
about now, I don't want to send something out to the council, but the council says, look, we need more information, and send it back to us.
I don't need, well, let me just tell you what the two issues that I have, and you can do whatever you want to do. So the first is, and I've talked to Ms. Berwick about this, one concern that I have is with renovations, that it's clear in the ordinance that as long as you comply with the new code, heat pumps, for instance, that you are not required to remove your existing system. That's the way it works with Mass Save right now. You're not required to remove it, and I think that's a good thing for two reasons. Number one, it's expensive to remove these, the old system, and number two, it can serve as a backup in extreme weather or whatever. And I think that that's a good option to have. And then the second thing is, and I know that I'm in the minority on this, but when we try to tell our constituents how to cook or what they can cook with, I think that that crosses a line. And whenever it comes up, I'll be making a motion on the full council to strike that, because I just think, to me, it crosses a line that I think we shouldn't be crossing. So those are the two issues. But again, on the first one, and I have this experience with a family member who went through the Mass Save program, everything worked out well. She went to heat pumps and so forth, but she was not required to remove the existing, and nobody is. So I hope that it's clear. I think Ms. Burke thinks that it is clear in there. To me, it's a little grayish, and so I'm hoping that there's some language in there that makes it very clear. That's all.
Ms. Berwick, do you want to respond to the first point?
Well, yeah, I think the examples are explicit. And I appreciate Councilor Gentile, you raising this point to be, so that I can be clear about it. The examples are explicit, that you can keep and use your old gas, whatever, heating system, stove in if you haven't done a major renovation. And if you have done a major renovation, nonetheless, you can keep it in the part of the building that's not been renovated.
Okay.
The second point, Councilor Gentile, is that under the electrification ordinance, if you build an addition, the stove would be all electric. So just to be clear, that's if you're in the scope of what the new ordinance would require, that's part of what all electrification means. You may not agree with that, and that's certainly an open opportunity, but I just want to be clear. Ms. Berwick, is that accurate?
Yes, but let me just clarify. So let's say you do you completely redo your second floor, but your stove is on your first floor. You keep your gas stove. Is that, Councilor Gentile, we're
I think the question is the choice of the stove an option still in the new part that's all electrified, Ms. Berwick? I think that's not what's.
No, not unless it's a commercial pizza oven or something, but in your house, in your house, if you do a major renovation, let's say it's a first floor major renovation, and that's in your first floor is where your kitchen is, your stove has got to be electric.
And so I know that I understand that to be the case, and I have spoken with Dan about this in the past, so I know that that's the case. I guess what I'm saying is, to me, that's just government overstepping, and I don't agree with it. So I will be offering an amendment whenever it comes to the full council. I think when you tell people that they only have one way in which to cook, that's a little bit too intrusive.
No, I totally understand your point of view. No, I respect your point of view, but let me just be clear that that amendment wouldn't work. That is, if we tried to amend the ordinance such that we created an exemption for electric stoves in a major renovation, or for said allow gas stoves in a major renovation, that would not be acceptable to the state, and therefore we wouldn't be allowed to participate in the 10 Communities program, meaning we wouldn't be allowed to require electrification of new construction in general. So that amendment, I understand completely and respect your point of view, but we couldn't do that.
I heard, no, I know, I've heard that, and I'm just thinking that, to me anyway, it would make better sense for us to allow people to cook with what they want to cook with, and then send it to the state. And if you're correct, well, then we have another decision to make. But I would like to think that the state, like it has with other exemptions, when you think about it, some of the exemptions that are in there are much more, are going to have a much greater negative effect on the environment than somebody cooking with a gas stove or whatever. I mean, look at the stuff that we are exempting. So I just don't get it. I just think that people ought to be allowed to cook with whatever they want to cook with, in light of everything else that we're doing. But again, I don't want to take the committees, I just giving you a heads up, Mr. Chairman, that I feel pretty strongly about that, because I don't want to all of a sudden surprise you at the full council. And I'm fine with, you know, what's been going on to this point. And again, I know you got a lot of work to do, so let me just close with that.
Well, I appreciate it. I think if you do have that language, though, ultimately, it would need to be in a form that the council can entertain. So I would encourage you to reach out to Mr. Lee, at least so that the language could be in, now, there's the choice of whether to adopt it or not is a policy decision, but I would prefer not to be in a situation where we're worrying about how it's drafted as opposed to what it says.
No,
Mr. Chair, can
I would certainly, you know, consult with law to make sure that it's in the proper form.
I appreciate that, Councilor Gentile. I'm sorry for interrupting. I just wanted to make a suggestion. If perhaps you can get that language to us sooner than later. DOER has already indicated that they would reject a exemption like that, but I don't see the need to have it go through full council before we get that confirmation from DOER. So if you can get that language to me sooner than later, we can preview, more than preview, we can send that language directly to DOER and say, one of the councils is thinking about amending our current version to include this. Are you going to approve it? And if they say yes, fine. If they say no, also fine. But it seems like it would make more sense to have that answer before going through the process with full council and then having to do everything all over again.
Well, I'm going to depend on you for getting the language right from the start. So either I can call you or you can call me, whatever we want, whatever works. All right.
I'll make that happen.
All right.
All right, so let's have an early conversation on that. Councilor Oliver.
Great, thank you, Chair. I'm just curious before we kind of take a vote on what we do next. How did we collect public input? I'm just gonna put it this way, last time around. Did we talk to did we talk to our architects groups? Did we talk to builders? Did the public sound off? I'm completely ignorant of that process and don't want to be by the time we're gonna vote tonight. Anybody?
It's gone back so far. Who
Yeah, I
remembers?
can't remember. I think we had comment from the public, but not a formal session like I'm anticipating on the 10th.
Because we didn't make it a formal change.
We may have, actually, if I can pipe, you know, this has been before public facilities, I don't know, probably 8 or 9 times. And I honestly don't recall. I think there have been public hearings, but
So there have been 2 public hearings and
public
then
hearings.
this
Okay.
this goes back really far. And if you'll all bear with me, I'm gonna just try to lay it out as quickly and succinctly as possible, which is this all started, the public facilities meetings that Ann is talking about wasn't the electrification ordinance in the form we're talking about. That was all the petition
That's
to the
right.
state in order for the city to get the authority to ban natural gas, because it was clear that we were preempted from doing so. Only the state had that authority. Instead of responding to the home rule petition filed by the city of Newton, what the state ended up doing was creating this 10 communities program, saying, you know what, we're not going to say that you can just do it, but we're going to allow certain 10 communities that meet particular requirements to opt into this electrification pilot program. And then once the state did that, it came to ZAP. And then ZAP held a public hearing prior to the city even creating the ordinance for it. And that hearing was last year. It was last year, almost exactly a year from May. I have to look back, but I know it was in 2023. Then after we went through the whole application process and ZAP had approved what the staff had submitted to the state, that all went to a public hearing. That's the first public hearing in this process. After we sent the application to the state and they said, green light, you meet all of our requirements, that ordinance went through this committee again. And then there was another public hearing in February. After that public hearing went to full city council. However, at full city council, that's when we realized, or that's when DOER, I should say, put out new guidance that wasn't exactly adding up with our understanding what had been conveyed to us previously. And those were those differences that Ann had pointed out at the beginning of this meeting. And that's why we had to take it back. And by we, I mean the city council voted to send it back to committee. That's how it ended up back in ZAP, so that we can reconcile the differences between the DOER guidance that they had, most recently provided and what our understanding was based on what they had provided us previously. So we've since done that. That's basically all the changes, the very minor ones that we did in this draft that's currently before the Zoning and Planning Committee. So there have already been 2 public hearings, one with a very similar text than what we have now. We have clarified a few things. So the last thing I'm going to say with regards to the process, without indicating, which way is right, because from a policy perspective, you can't have it. The state did require that we have a public hearing prior to adopting the ordinance language. We have satisfied that requirement. So, but obviously, if more public comment is if ZAP wants more public comment, that's also fine.
So if I can just add to that, and clearly Mr. Lee's in a position to write the definitive.
Hang on a minute. I had a technical problem. I just literally couldn't hear a phrase Mr. Lee said. You have a choice of another hearing or not, Mr. Lee, and then?
No, he said the state required something when we lost what he said.
Yeah, I lost a word or two.
The state required that the city hold a public hearing prior to adopting the ordinance. We did that. We satisfied that in February.
Okay. So that's, sorry, I just want to be clear. Ms. Berwick?
Now I'm losing, sorry, what I was I remember. So Mr. Lee could clearly write the definitive history of the electrification ordinance in the city of Newton. But I just want to be clear that every time this has come before a committee or the city council, we have sent notifications. We have asked Ms. Norton to send notification, not just to everybody who she typically sends the notice of the Friday packet to, but that we also put together a list of contractors and building professionals who we also sent the list to, who we also sent the ordinance to. And I personally, a number of times, but more specifically within the last, I don't remember, 7 or 8 days, sent the draft ordinance and the examples document to the Chamber of Commerce, to Greg Reedman, and to the Buildings Committee of the Chamber specifically, not just to Greg Reedman, but also to that committee of the Chamber. And I also sent it to the Economic Development Commission of the city. So we have tried our very best to make it as absolutely available as we could. This is not happening under the table.
This is not a surprise anyway, but we do have a choice in the committee. I want to get a sense of the committee. We can act on the draft that's before us tonight and recommend it to the council at our next council meeting before the summer, or we can hold the item and hear from the public about it as well as Berto. We haven't talked about Berto at all, and then act after that conversation is concluded. Do I have a sense of the committee, Councilor Albright?
So besides already wanting to move approval, I think it would be confusing to put Berto and this on an agenda at the same time.
So too.
I think people are confused tonight about the difference between this and the stretch and the specialized building code already. So I think we're there. I think it's put a fork in it, it's done. I really do. Yeah, I think we don't want to confuse people
Well,
further.
I've indicated that the public comment period is going to be about Berto, because that's really where I was hearing. I didn't hear a lot of concern about the electrification ordinance. I heard questions about what it meant and how to understand it, but not about whether we should adopt it, subject to the concerns like Councilor Gentile has indicated. So,
Why don't you make your motion?
I did.
well, you want to move the ordinance?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to get clear. Councilor Albright has moved that we as a committee, move ahead on the electrification ordinance and recommend it to the council. Is that clear?
Mm.
Everybody understand that? Members of the committee who are not, in the room understand that? And yes, all right. So the motion before the committee is to move the electrification ordinance as prepared by the law department, with the understanding that Mr. Lee and Councilor Gentile will confer on a possible amendment that may come before the council, so that we can have that understanding clarified in advance if we possibly can. But it would at least have the electrification ordinance that's currently before us to the council at its next meeting. All right? Is everybody clear? That's what we were talking about? So we have that motion from Councilor Albright. Any discussion on the motion?
Can I just add
Yeah.
that the clarifications that we were provided tonight make it easier and less expensive in many ways for our citizens and residents to use this electrification ordinance than it was before. Because you can do a major renovation and keep parts of your house the same way it always was. So if we passed it the last time, which we did, we ought to really pass it this time because it's much more amenable.
Put it another way, we were willing to pass it when there seemed to be some burdens imposed that are no longer there. So we should be more at ease with passing it
Yes.
for real. All right, okay. All right, am I fair summary?
Yeah.
Okay, any other comment on the motion?
Not
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah, Councilor
I
Lee.
think also the commissioner just had mentioned this, but most people who are doing major work on their house do have a contractor. These contractors are required to be up to date with all ordinances, including local ordinances in cities and towns, as well as state building codes. There's so many building ordinances that it would be really difficult for a homeowner to know all this, and they don't really have to if they have a professional who knows the rules. And I think that's really important to remember, because most people, when they're doing even a minor work, they hire a builder who, or a contractor who knows or should know the codes. So I wanted to make that clear because there's so much discussion about educating the public, but I mean, basically, if you need to go to a doctor, you go to a doctor who's trained to do the work, right? You can't know everything. So I just wanted to make that, I think that's a really important point to remember.
Thank you, Councilor Larry, and we always welcome you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Councilor Princeman.
Councilor Princeman, I'm sorry, your hand is up.
Well, I'm sorry, my hand is up too, but nonetheless, I will speak very briefly. I just want to say that I struggled with this for some of the reasons that were clarified. I talked to some folks, I talked to residents, counselors, individuals in different businesses about the need to change existing infrastructure, even though you weren't touching it when you were putting on a major renovation. I'm glad that one's been cleared up. I think that was the biggest obstacle to me. I didn't like, the instance you were talking about earlier where you put on a second floor and now suddenly you have to modify your kitchen that you weren't touching. I can't say it's a no-brainer for me. It's not a slam dunk no-brainer that this is great, but I think on the whole and in the aggregate, it's a positive thing and worth it to do the electrification ordinance. So I'm going to vote for it. I would like to see us provide some guidance and some clarification around that commercial example I was talking about earlier in terms of restaurants or other commercial entities that need, for example, gas stove to ensure that those establishments are going to be able to open. It sounds like they will be able to, but I would just like to see us provide that guidance to enable them to do that. I will be voting for it. Thank you.
Okay, let me just ask Ms. Berwick, is it possible to give that kind of guidance on that specific? You gave the pizza of an example earlier, but something that would be an addendum to your explanation. You were going to clarify your explanations anyway. And I wondered,
If the commissioner.
or the commissioner, maybe with the commissioner, between the two of you.
I think what probably we were gonna talk, we were gonna talk about other things too, but next meeting, we can talk about it in as far as what the waivers or exemptions or.
Yeah, I mean, yes. Let me even try. I was hoping to get the clarification correction out in the next couple of days, even before Commissioner and Ms. Silks and I meet. I think I might be able to add just a couple of sentences that would add some further clarification, but before I put it out, Anthony, I'll run it by you.
Okay. I think it would be useful to have for the packet for the council so that we have an up-to-date version of your memo. You've indicated a little clarification you want to make anyway, and I think that
Yes.
it would be an asset to the report rather to reference that. Councilor Danberg on the
Yeah,
motion.
just a process question. And maybe the law department can help with this. I don't need an answer, right now. My question, would be, is this, the pizza oven level question, is this something that could be done at the policy level as opposed to at the ordinance level? Again, I don't need an answer to that, but that might be, a solution.
I'm not sure I understand the distinction.
Yeah.
Could you say that again?
Policy as opposed to at the ordinance
Well,
level.
there's an exemption built into the ordinance that might encompass this issue right now, but I think that the point is the ordinance has to have a place for it. You can't just sort of say, we want the, you can't just make it sort of say, the ordinance says this, but we really don't mean it. We've got to have a place that the pizza oven or its equivalent can fit. Okay, so I think it's a useful idea, but I think the point is that Ms. Berwick and the commissioner will work to try and make sure that the commercial question that Councilor Krinsman has raised is at least clarified by our meeting of the full council when we take this up. But I'd like to get to a vote if we can, because we still got Berto to get through in the climate action plan, and I'm trying to get us out of here by 10 o'clock. I'm not sure I'm going to do it, but let's see. Okay, any further discussion on the motion? All right, all those in favor of sending the electrification ordinance is now modified to the full council for vote at its next meeting, will say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Okay, I think that's unanimous vote of the committee. I want to thank you, Ms. Berwick, and thank you, Commissioner, for participating. I'm going to suggest while we get Mr. Ferguson set up, let's just take a minute recess for all of us to go out and come back for whatever reasons we have, and then we'll start again. All right? Hey, let's restart, folks. This is, the zoning and planning committee, Act Two. We're going to hear now about BERDO, which is a shorthand term for Building Emissions Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance. And to be specific, it is item 4224, request for discussion and ordinance to require energy use reporting. Councilors Albright, Danberg, and Leary on behalf of the Newton City's Citizens Commission on Energy, requesting discussion and an ordinance that would require large property owners, parentheses, campuses and large commercial buildings, close parentheses, to report energy use and associated greenhouse gas emissions annually to the city of Newton, to be used to encourage reductions in said energy use and the greenhouse gas emissions in accordance and support of the goals set forth in the Newton Climate Action Plan. And just again, to reiterate, we anticipate hearing extensively from the Energy Commission about this item at the public comment on the 10th. But right now, I want to turn over the conversation to Mr. Ferguson to explain the ordinance and what we need to do so that we can ask the kind of questions we asked earlier for the other ordinance and try and get all of those issues out before us as soon as possible. Mr. Ferguson, welcome.
Thank you, Chair Baker. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I think so. That's great.
And do you see the presentation on your screen?
No.
Oh, we see a PDF with a big
We see your trajectory, we don't see the presentation.
I think you're sharing, you need to share a different screen.
All right.
Who knew we would know these terms? You know, 3 years ago. I want you to share your screen. What?
How about that?
That's
Yeah.
great. Okay.
Good?
Got you.
All right, thank you. So I'm Bill Ferguson. I'm co-director of sustainability for the city of Newton. And thank you for making the time for me to present our final ordinance and discuss with you what's included in that ordinance. We've been working on this ordinance for 3 years. And we've had several public information sessions as we've developed the ordinance. And it is, we do have a final draft that we've submitted for your consideration that has been developed by, with help from Andrew Lee, led by Ann Berwick, and with my participation. So let me go through these slides and try to give you a rundown on what the ordinance includes.
Mr. Ferguson, before you begin, just because I said it at the beginning of the meeting, but it's been a while back, I just want to mention that Councilor Danberg has submitted an amendment, but we will reserve that amendment for discussion until after our public comment later on. Okay.
Okay, thank you. I did see that. Thank you for sending that. So BERDO stands for Building Emissions Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance. In April of 22, the City Council passed a resolution which committed itself to developing an ordinance that will require large property owners to report energy use and emissions to the city annually, and in subsequent years demonstrate reductions in energy use and emissions to meet benchmarks established for their building type, with the goal of becoming carbon neutral by 2050. That's what we've been working on for the last 3 years, and that's what we've presented to you for your consideration. What is BERDO? BERDO is an ordinance that will require large buildings to report energy and emissions to the city. It requires large buildings to gradually reduce greenhouse gas emissions over time to 0 by 2050. BERDO is necessary for the city to meet its climate action plan target of 0 emissions by 2050. The city council adopted the mayor's climate action plan in 2019, and that plan has a goal of the city of Newton reaching 0 by 2050. This is a big piece of that plan to reach that goal. I'm going to cover several topics in this presentation. I want you to just take a look at what we're going to cover, including the makeup of the BERDO team, why BERDO, buildings covered by BERDO, what the compliance timeline is for BERDO, the fact that we've excluded electricity emissions from the standard, which is something new since our last presentation to you in November. I want to talk about reporting simplified, discuss Boston as a model, the rate of emissions reduction and how that simplifies compliance, compliance flexibility, example compliance pathways. We're going to show you various ways a hypothetical building could meet compliance through various pathways. Enforcement of the ordinance, provisions for enforcement, and an emissions investment fund that is included under the ordinance. Well, let me just briefly mention that, as I said, we've been working on this really for, our team has been together since March of 22. We've actually been working on it since about April of 2021, but the team has been meeting regularly, and it includes city staff such as Ann Berwick, Leora Silks, and Andrew Lee. They've been very involved in the development of the BERDO in coordination with Josh Morse, Bonnie Heath, and John Sisson. The Newton Citizens Commission on Energy has been very involved and has probably attended close to 100 meetings working with us to develop this ordinance and discuss issues on a weekly basis and make decisions on which way to go on some of the important concepts included in the ordinance. Also, Dan Rubin from Green Newton has been part of that group, and we've retained Synapse Energy Economics. Philip Eschgates is actually on our panel tonight in case we want to ask him for some answers to some technical questions that he's been paying particular attention to for us. Why BERDO? It's an efficient approach to advancing climate action plan targets through 2050. Why is it efficient? Because the 293 commercial buildings that are covered by this ordinance represent 23% of the total Newton emissions. That's 1.3% of the buildings in Newton account for 23% of Newton emissions. If we can reduce and eliminate emissions in this sector, we will go a long way in achieving our 2050 goal of 0 emissions. It's also consistent with local strategies in the greater Boston area. Most of you probably know that Boston adopted a BERDO, and Cambridge also adopted their version of BERDO. They call it BUDO. And Watertown is in the process of also adopting a BERDO ordinance, all of which will include an emissions standard and a compliance requirement. BERDO covers commercial buildings, that's the piece of pie up here, the Berto commercial, 23%. It's 23% of the whole pie that you see there. I just want to point out that that pie includes transportation sector, it includes gas leaks, it includes smaller commercial buildings, residential buildings less than 20,000 square feet, and we plan to add residential buildings over 20,000 square feet next year. But right now we're focusing on the commercial sector, buildings over 20,000 square feet that represent 23% of the emissions pie in the city of Newton. So once again, the buildings covered are commercial buildings at this stage in this draft ordinance that we've submitted. It's 293 buildings that are greater or equal to 20,000 square feet of gross floor area. And we will be planning to add residential buildings in April of 2025, a year from now. Covered buildings, the bottom line on this chart represents the buildings that are currently included in the proposed ordinance. The commercial buildings, it's 293 buildings. Once again, it represents 23% of all emissions in Newton. When we expand it to include residential buildings next year, that number of buildings jumps up to a total of 413 buildings and a total of 28% of all emissions in the city. So it'll be an increase of 5%. These are the building groups, we call them tiers, that are being covered by the proposed ordinance. Tier 1 is the largest commercial buildings, buildings over 100,000 square feet. There are 47 of those in the city, and they account for 46% of the emissions from the 293 buildings. So it's 46% of the emissions from the covered buildings. So it's a big piece right there. Tier 2 is a grouping of buildings that are 50,000 to 99,000 square feet. There's 70 of those. And then Tier 3 is buildings 35,000 to 49,000 square feet. There's 67 of those buildings. And then finally, the smaller commercial buildings, buildings 20,000 to 34,000 square feet. There's 109 of those buildings. So there's quite a few buildings in Tier 4, 109, and it accounts for 15% of the savings. And I note that because on this chart here, it shows that we're phasing in implementation based on those tiers and the impacts of those tiers. So Tier 1 will be the first group of buildings that will be covered by Berto. Berto reports will be due, or actually energy and emissions reports, I should call them, will be due in 2025 for this current calendar year. So next September 15th, 2025, 47 buildings will be required to submit energy reports to the city. And then 2 years later, the emissions requirement will take effect. So for calendar year 2027, these larger buildings will be required to meet the emission standard that is included in this ordinance with their first report under the emissions compliance requirement due September 15th, 2028. And as you can see, we're phasing in the first energy and emissions report for the other three groups a year after this smaller group of 47 buildings. And the compliance year is phased in, as you can see in that column there, from 2027 through 2030. We will be adding one tier of buildings each year. The reason for this is we want a year to have experience with the program, implementing the requirements, developing the procedures, and have a small group of buildings to work with to help iron out any glitches, work with building owners on doing that, and setting ourselves up so that we have a smoothly running program, learning from the experience of that first year with the 47 buildings and carrying it over into any revised procedures that will be needed to have a smooth running program. So after that first group of 47, we'll add the remaining buildings for the purpose of the energy and emissions reporting requirement. And this revised version of the ordinance, this is different from what we presented in November. We've excluded electricity from the emissions standard. We decided to do that as a team because state policy eliminates grid emissions over time. So BERDO can exclude electricity. In other words, state policy is addressing it. There's no need for us to do it with a local ordinance.
Mr. Ferguson, just
yes,
by what the grid emissions are for the public as well as perhaps some of the.
Yeah, it's electricity emissions. It's the grid. Roughly 50% of the electricity produced by the grid in New England is produced by fossil fuel generation, mainly gas-fired power plants. Over time, the state has policies that will reduce those emissions, and therefore we don't have to try to do it through a local ordinance. The state has requirements that will make that happen without intervention on a local level.
Thank you. Sorry, carry on.
As I said, this greatly simplifies reporting and compliance. The emission standard will cover only on-site use of energy, which essentially is natural gas, oil, and propane emissions only. Owners will be required to report electricity use, but not electricity emissions. Electricity emissions complicates the program compliance and program reporting quite a bit. And that will be eliminated, that complication will be eliminated from Newton's ordinance. So here's the a chart that shows the Massachusetts Clean Energy Regulations. Combined clean and renewable electricity procurement mandates in the Commonwealth will attain 92% clean energy by 2030, 100% by 2050, using the technologies listed below. So as I previously mentioned, the Newton BERDO simplifies reporting. Reports will be submitted through the Energy Star Portfolio Manager tool, which is a tool that's been available for a few decades, I think now. And is used by many building owners to track their energy performance over time and compare them to other buildings. And through this web tool, you can get an Energy Star rating. But the main reason we want to use it is because it's the industry standard for these types of energy performance programs, and it produces a number for carbon emissions per square foot, which is what our emission standard is based on. It's based on kilograms of CO2 per square foot for a building type. That's what our standard is based on, and that's the output that portfolio manager provides. It's fairly simple to use, we think, although we've heard some people have trouble with it. But as an example, we asked Synapse to put in the 30 city buildings that are covered by Berto. 30 of those 293 buildings are city-owned buildings, mainly schools. They're covered by Berto, and we asked Synapse to enter our 30 city buildings in Portfolio Manager, and they were able to do that in about 15 hours. So the reporting, as I previously said, requires, it's an annual report. It requires reporting of all energy use, including electricity, natural gas, fossil fuel, and propane. And I would note that all the electricity and gas use you need to complete a report under Portfolio Manager, it's on your monthly bill. So in other words, if you took your monthly bill for January and we're trying to do a report under Portfolio Manager for the prior year, all 12 months of data are on that bill. You don't have to go looking for that data. That goes for the utilities, that goes for gas and electric. If you're using delivered fuels, you have to look for your through your own receipts for fuel delivery to find that data and enter it. And I just want to emphasize that the city will be providing training and education on how to use Portfolio Manager and how to apply it to determine whether you're in compliance with the ordinance or not. That'll be part of what we're doing when we adopt the program. It'll be provided by Synapse and city staff, that service, that assistance. So just looking at Newton Berto compared to Boston's Berto, we started out by using Boston, but made some changes to Boston's Berto ordinance. Those changes for now include we are excluding residential apartments and condos for now. We still have some work to do in that area that we want to do over the next year, and then we'll include residential in the ordinance. We'll add it to the ordinance and come back to you in a year for approval. The scale of our ordinance, it addresses 40.
Time out
Yep.
just a second. I just want to highlight, because this will come up again.
Yep.
You say that we will include this in the ordinance. Is there, is the anticipation that there will be, that they will automatically be included, or there'll be a further amendment as the current proposal? I know Councilor Danberg has an amendment, but I just want to understand the version, or the public to understand the version that you have before us now, and anticipate when we come back in a year.
Yeah, so the current ordinance doesn't address residential at all. We will come back in a year with an amendment that adds residential buildings, apartment buildings, and residential condos that are over 20,000 square feet. We've done a lot of work in this area. We have a list of those buildings, but there's more work we'd like to do before we include residential.
We'll have a conversation about that later, but I just wanted to clarify that's what it is now. Okay, carry on, please.
Yep. So just want to mention that Boston's dealing with almost 4,000 buildings. In the city of Newton, we're dealing with 293 buildings, 47 in year one. We've simplified reporting and compliance by eliminating the electricity emissions from the standard. We think we'll be able to deliver this program and assist in delivering this program. Will make it simpler for our building owners to comply with this program because of these things. We are phasing the program in over 4 years, beginning in 2027. Boston is doing it all at once. All the emissions standards take effect in 2025 in Boston. For Newton, it'll be phased in over 4 years by those tiers we talked about earlier. Compliance periods are different for Newton. They're aligned with capital planning cycles. I'm going to show you a chart in a minute to try to illustrate that. But basically what that means is the bigger decreases in emissions that are required by the Newton ordinance are towards the end of the period, closer to 2050 than the beginning of the ordinance. The stringency reductions are more gradual in Newton than under the Berto ordinance in Boston. And penalties, we're going to defer penalties until the 3rd year of the emission standards. And here's a graph that shows the Boston emissions reduction requirement in orange. And it's much steeper than the Newton reduction requirement, which is in blue under this proposal that we've just submitted. So for example, in Boston, they expect a reduction from 100% at the beginning of the program to 50% of your carbon by 2030. So a 50% reduction. In Newton, and that's the second step of their ordinance. These lines show steps. This is step 1. This is step 2. Under Newton, step 1 is here. Step 2 is here. And we'll be at 20% reduction or 80% of total carbon use. So it's much more gradual, much easier to comply with in the beginning, which gives, we believe, gives building owners more time to develop a plan and develop not only a technical plan, but a capital plan for compliance with the ordinance. Ultimately, all buildings will have to be at 0 in 2050. This is the standards. I think the only point I really want to make here, because I know it's just a bunch of numbers to you all, but it applies to 12 different building types. And and there are periods 1 through 5 where the emissions standard declines every period until we reach 0. And that standard varies by building type, as you see on this chart. And once again, that's directed emissions only. Electricity emissions are not included on this chart. They are not a requirement of the Newton-Berto. There are features to the Newton-Berto that provide flexibility for building owners to comply. Phased implementation is one of them. We briefly talked about how it's phased in over time by building size. The delay in enforcement penalties. We do not levy penalties prior to the 3rd year of emissions, of the emissions requirement becoming effective. Portfolios. If you're the owner of 2 or more buildings in the city of Newton, you can combine them into one emissions rating if that's easier for you to administer or makes it easier for you to comply with the ordinance. So that's an option that can be exercised by a building owner. Individual compliance plans is another option. It allows a change of schedule for compliance. Instead of following the schedule on the chart I just showed you, you can come up with a schedule that is unique to your building using a base year that might be more advantageous to you as a building owner. That plan would be developed by the building owner and submitted to the city for review and approval. There's also a category of hardship plans, which allows changes in emissions and schedule. So it would accommodate unique circumstances or conditions such as financial hardship, regulatory or contractual restrictions, technical or operational constraints. And there are multiple compliance pathways. So you can meet your emission standards through energy efficiency, phased electrification, or payment of an alternative compliance payment. Here's an example of a hypothetical 30,000 square foot office building and pathways that it can follow to comply with the emission standard. This particular building uses natural gas for space heating and water heating, so that's their source of emissions. So their goal would be to eliminate their natural gas use by 2050 in order to comply with this standard. And they could do it by, this is once again a hypothetical situation. You could do a HVAC tune-up of your boiler and heating system and hot water system, and improved controls, and save 11% of your fossil fuel use and reduce your emissions. You could insulate your roof for possibly another 5% savings, something that every building eventually has to replace their roof. When you do it, you do it with slightly increased insulation levels and air sealing levels to try to achieve a additional savings. You could do a heat pump retrofit of one of the 2 floors of the building, so you don't have to do the whole building all at once. You could phase it in and do just one of the floors with heat pumps. You could do heat pump water heating convert your domestic hot water heating system from natural gas to electric, and finally finish off the space heating with a heat pump measure. Enforcement. Non-compliance penalties begin the third year of the effective date of the emissions requirement. So we provided some leeway there with all building owners will have some time to prepare and implement a plan before penalties become effective. They're set at $300 a day. And just note here that in Boston, they go up to $1,000 a day. And penalties could be levied for failure to submit a report, inaccurate reporting, or failure to meet emission standards. The payments under the fines or the penalties and the alternative compliance payments that I previously mentioned would be placed in a special fund in the city and be administered by the Climate Sustainability Office. And they could be used for a variety of things that are listed here, including projects that benefit environmental justice populations in Newton, costs for the city to administer BERDO, costs for the city to comply with BERDO, costs to local nonprofits such as affordable housing providers to comply with BERDO, and education related to the implementation of BERDO. And that's the end of my presentation. I have some additional slides that might be helpful to answer questions.
Let's see where we are in terms of, if we get into specific questions for your extra slides, maybe illuminating, let's go to them there. But I think what we really want to do is make sure that members of the committee and others on the council who are attending tonight fully understand what the city proposal is. And then when we get to a conversation with the public and on June 10th, we want to make sure that all of us are prepared for that conversation and understand, for example, the residential piece as well. But but we won't, I don't expect to act on this tonight. I just want to make sure that everyone understands the basic idea of what is being proposed and how it's going to go forward. So let's see, members of the committee, let me start with Councilor Albright and Councilor Wright. And then I don't see any electronic hands in the ether yet. So we'll start with those two and then see where we go. Okay.
My first question might be just a housekeeping question. In one of your early slides, you said these commercial buildings comprise 34% of emissions and then 23% of Newton emissions. I think that's what the slide said.
Yeah.
I didn't understand what the 34% was. What's the 34% of?
Yeah, that's a little confusing. The 34% is 34% of all building emissions in Newton. So just in the building sector, these 293 buildings represent 34% of the building energy. The 23% is, or not energy, emissions, 34% of all emissions. The 23% is all emissions, including all sectors, transportation, gas leaks, everything.
Okay.
So that's the difference.
Okay. So my other question had to do with your timetable. So I would assume, maybe I'm wrong, that doing the 100,000 square foot buildings is harder and more costly and more time consuming, is that right? Than the smaller buildings?
As far as what in
Let me ask
particular?
my whole question. So my whole question is, if that was the case, that the 100,000 square foot buildings are more costly and harder to do, then why would you make them go first? I know it would give you more it would give you less emissions, it would give you a bigger boost earlier on. But on the other hand, you're taking the hardest ones and making them go first, quicker. So that was, could you discuss that?
Yeah, I don't necessarily think they're gonna be harder to do as far as reporting. In fact, I suspect that a lot of building owners and buildings of that size have resources available already and might be already putting their buildings into portfolio manager, but they'll definitely have more resources available on staff to provide that type of service as opposed to smaller buildings. We're concerned that smaller buildings might not have the staff resources available or consulting resources available to develop the reports and to develop a compliance plan. So that's our
Is it
thinking.
the same, does the same principle apply to actually not just reporting, but making the changes?
Compliance, I think in larger buildings, there's gonna be more work to do, but it's going to be the same, similar or the same kind of work you would do in smaller buildings in order to comply with the standards. So it would be a bigger job, a more expensive job, but not necessarily, we wouldn't think it's gonna be more expensive per square foot, for instance, to do a larger building than it would a smaller building.
Oh, thank you for your answer. I look forward to hearing from the actual building owners about all this. Thank you for the presentation. It was great.
Councilor Wright next.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you for the presentation. What would be helpful if there were page numbers on these? I'm going to, first about the reporting, and it's mentioned that reporting is covered in more detail. And that a consultant, one of their staff people went through this. So it sounded like it's, what was it, 15 buildings in 30 hours, so it's 2 hours per building roughly. Does that include the training? Because especially with smaller property owners, they might just have an admin that isn't very technical to do this. Is it really a realistic number that it's only gonna take them 2 hours a year to do this?
Well, I think actually for our building, it only took a half an hour. And you know what? I'm gonna ask Philip. Philip Esch Gates is with us from Synapse. His staff person did that work and he supervised it. So he could answer that question firsthand.
Thank you.
And one more thing while he's getting on, some properties, you're the property owner, but your tenant is paying for electricity or the heat or whatever. So they need to get their bills in order to do part of the reporting, because not all buildings is the property owner paying for everything.
Yeah, I'm gonna let Philip answer that too, because that's one of his areas he's been looking at.
Good evening, and thank you for the questions. They're very pertinent. Our staff, we have a junior staff member who I instructed in how to enter buildings into Portfolio Manager, and she both learned how to use the tool following online trainings that are available through the US EPA, and she entered the buildings into Portfolio Manager, and that took about 15 hours for the 30 buildings, and that included the time to collect and review the utility bills and put them into the tool along with building characteristic information.
So if they don't have that information, so they have to go back to their tenants to get what's your electric bill for the past year type thing?
That's correct, that they would need to obtain energy use information for all of the meters at the site. And if there are tenants that have control of the meters or the data, but they don't necessarily need to collect that from the tenants. The preferred approach is to go through the utility. And there is a standard online platform that we've actually helped some building owners in Newton go through the process. And it's a one-page form that they fill out to request aggregated electricity or gas use information for the entire property. And under the current guidelines for data access, you can submit a form and the utility is required to provide that. So it's really a one-page form that gets submitted online, and then the building owner receives a report from the utility, basically a spreadsheet that they can copy and paste into this free online tool, Energy Star Portfolio Manager. So it's pretty.
But in the training, it sounds like it's outside training, but maybe internally within the city that they have all this information. This is the form, this is how you do it, you know, how to collect it. It'll be a lot easier because, you know, the bigger properties, yes, they might, you know, have more than one in other places. They may be familiar with it, but I'm thinking of the smaller properties, you know, they only own one building. They're not very familiar with that.
Just on that point, when we get to the public comment period, Mr. Ferguson.
Yes.
I don't expect you to repeat this whole presentation, but I think it might be, depending on how the will of the committee, for you to take the example of a building like you did and say, this is what the ordinance would do, and this is what you would need to do to comply with it, just so that the public and all of us hearing that testimony are adequately informed.
Sure.
To go through the whole ordinance, but I do think the examples we've seen time and again, if people have an example they can understand, then we're able to wrap our minds around this a little easier.
Sure, be glad to do that.
I also like under the proposed compliance flexibility that a property owner can combine buildings into one, and I think that's very good. I'm just gonna have a couple comments because I know this is more into the residential thing, and we weren't really discussing that. The first thing you said, the available technology, well, first I'll tell you, so I have a two-family in Boston, and I actually went and I did heat pumps, and I'm thinking residential, and I had to wait until all my tenants left before I could make this change. And if you have a bigger place, you don't have that flexibility, but when you were calculating the costs and what I was going through and you went through this, I'm not sure if you included the upgrade to electrical. You know, if you're gutting it or whatever, you gotta fur out your walls if you have an older building, which, you know, costs more. The lost rent or the cost of relocation should be in there. And if you have a forced hot air system, yes, it would be a lot easier. But if you have radiators, that would be, you know, you gotta now run duct work or, you know, things like that, you know, repair floors, walls, things like that. And I don't think that was all included in your cost. And you should look at, here's a hot air system and here's a radiator system. And then you mentioned on there, utility incentives for technologies. And I wasn't really sure what that was. And again, you don't have to answer it now. And after I did this to my apartments, my rents to recoup it, went up, like, average 35%. So something that's naturally affordable now, you know, and if they have to comply, and again, this needs more discussion, more thought, you know, we may be losing some of these naturally affordable apartments. Because it is not cheap, and with myself going through this. Yeah.
I agree with you, Counselor. You're making our case for waiting a year so that we can understand these issues better and how to deal with them.
And again, you know, if you already have a forced hot air system, it makes it a lot easier. If you don't,
right.
You know, I have another two-family and I have radiators, and I'm still racking my head on this, you know, and you know, I don't want, and those are naturally affordable apartments, and I don't want to kick people out in order to do this. And yeah, okay, thank you.
Yep, thank you for the comments. Those are good comments, and this really summarizes the reasons we would like to wait a year to dig into those questions more and understand the answers and you know, how to deal with those answers properly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Other questions? I think,
Randy Block.
Councillor Block.
Okay.
Sorry for the delay there.
Wait a minute, we got
Fine.
two hands. I didn't see. If you bear with me, Councillor Block, let me take Councillor Getz first. She's a member.
Sure, of course, of course.
I'll come to you. I just,
Thank you.
using the electronic hands, the variable visibility. It's,
Right, I just have some, you know, I kind of want to dovetail a little bit on Councilor Wright's comments, because I'm a little concerned about accommodations or exclusions for historic buildings. Of the properties that you mentioned, what percentage of these buildings are actually, you know, built at the turn of the last century, you know, in terms of commercial buildings? Because we have quite a few of them. In Newton, and I'm sort of concerned that, you know, we have landmarked and we also have historic buildings that, as Councilor Wright was speaking to, the cost of renovation, you know, and the application of BERDO to these buildings and the securing the building envelopes is going to be very, very costly. So, you know, I don't know whether or not that's been thought through.
Well,
So
yeah, I mean, that's a very good point, and it's something that we're concerned about. It's, you know, it's why we really have these compliance flexibility options, and also keeping in mind, I think sometimes we talk to building owners and they feel like they have to do this like next year, but you have, you know, 25 years to develop a plan, develop a capital plan. I think things are going to happen that are going to make these projects more economical. For instance, when we were talking about electrification, somebody mentioned that gas costs are going to increase, which we think is the case. And we think it's going to make electrification more economical. And we think potentially that some of these equipment costs will decrease over time. New technologies historically, as they go into mass production, become less expensive. So we think that will probably work in our favor. And we also think utility incentives, which are getting better, will continue to get better. And support from utilities for these programs, I think, is going to be pretty important. We meet with them regularly, and in fact, I've invited them to participate in the June 10th hearing by presenting some testimony, and hopefully they show up. And I've asked them to speak about the electricity capacity issue that was mentioned previously in this meeting, and also available incentives. So Eversource has indicated they will send somebody on the electrical capacity issue, and National Grid has indicated they will send somebody to talk about the incentives issue. So hopefully they will show up, and that'll provide us with some additional pertinent information.
So we'll talk offline about that before the 10th, just to make sure that we've got sort of the framework teed up for people in the public who are going to comment. I want to make sure.
Okay.
Well,
I am, my concern is just mostly that of course, we want to, you know, get these buildings to comply, you know, but it's as Councilor Wright was mentioning, it may be cost prohibitive. And so I don't want it to be a motivation for the loss of these buildings. You know, because they're significant buildings that are historic. And then I don't know whether or not, I was looking at the BERDO ordinance, Boston's BERDO ordinance. And is there any provision to establish a review board, an administrative review board in Newton?
No, we decided not to do that. we spent a lot of time discussing the review board, and we didn't, we think Boston has different circumstances, dealing with a lot more buildings, dealing with a lot more affordable housing, and I think those and also environmental justice populations in Boston far exceed what we see in Newton. So we think they had some particular circumstances that made more sense for them to have a review board. Our plan is to do it through the city staffer, the Berto administrator, who is mentioned in the ordinance.
So,
Okay, well, because I think we need to take a closer look at that. Okay, thank you. That's it for me.
let me
Thank
just,
you.
before I go to Councilor Block, Ferguson, I think the point is we're getting inquiries, and I think the administrative side of this is going to be an important conversation for everybody. The objectives are clear, I think, as you've laid them out, but helping a building owner go through a process, and then if they say, look, we have a problem here, how you resolve that and respond to it, I think is going to be part of what we're going to get questions about on the 10th. I'm just looking ahead. We don't have to answer all those tonight, but I just wanted to highlight it because that's at least what I'm hearing. So thank you, Councilor Getz. And let me do Councilor Danberg in the committee and then go out to Councilor Block. Councilor Danberg.
Yes, thank you very much. Mr. Ferguson, first of all, thank you very much for this presentation. There was an analysis of 181 Lexington Street, because I understand that the owner had some concerns about what his costs were going to be in complying, and that the building was chosen because he had come forward and because it was a typical building that would be a good idea to understand the parameters of. Could you give us a short synopsis of what they did and what they found?
Yeah, Dante Capasso and I have been talking and working together on this Berto, and he's expressed his concerns over it. And he's agreed to work with us to do a case study of his apartment building on 181 Lexington Street, a 30-unit building. And we have been doing a case study of that building. And his building is centrally heated with a hot water system and gas-fired boilers. So we were looking at an option to, instead of like replacing the boilers with gas fired boilers, replacing them with air to water heat pumps. We thought that might be an efficient approach to that type of building with that type of heating system. So Peter Barra is the volunteer who's been working on this study for us, and he's doing a great job. We were able to get 3 manufacturers of heat pump systems working with Peter on this case study. So we've got, I had contacts at Mitsubishi, LG, and Daikin, and they've all been involved in providing information about their equipment, some cost information, and so we're partway through that case study. It's not completed. We need to get costs for the electric utility upgrade. And we need to obtain information on what rebates are available. So those are two steps that need to be completed before we have a completed case study on that particular building. But that is one type of heating system that we wanted to evaluate. We think there's probably a number of that type of heating system in apartment buildings in the city, and we're trying to understand how to do it, what new technologies apply, what's it going to cost, how it's going to impact rents. So that's still ongoing.
Okay, and I assume you're gonna do a lifetime cost analysis also.
Yeah, we're going to add that to the study before it's complete, when we have all the data. Yep.
So just to follow up on Councilor Danberg's example, though, if we have such an example in real time, you're going to give us a sort of generic example, but I'm wondering if you will have a chance to finish your case study by the 10th, because it might be useful to say, okay, here's an existing building. We've run the numbers. Here's what would be involved, when and how, so that we can put some reality to this. Because again, people are going to say, how do I know what this is going to cost me? And at least if you can give an example where you've been able to run the numbers, I think it will give some sense of comfort to the people affected. Where there's
It's a residential building.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're not asking us.
No, I understand
So
that.
we're not including residential in our proposal.
Absolutely right.
But that was the building that they did an analysis of.
I'm just trying to figure out how much we can do to inform the public about the kind of shape of the compliance that they're going to be facing. That's all. I'm not, whether it's residential or not, I just think it's something that has some reality to it.
We have some other examples that we put together that Philip has been working on for us. So we could present those either June 10th, or if you want to take a quick look now, Peter. Philip might be able to go over those with you now.
I think there's some value. Let me just see what other questions are out there. I would rather see as much as we can, subject to the fatigue level of the committee.
Sure.
To just understand where we are, and then not go with new ground, but let the public comment as much as possible on the 10th. So, but let's see where the questions are from our colleagues. I have Councilor Block, I've got Councilor Leary, and then I'll go to Councilor Kalis.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Ferguson, thank you. You've done this presentation before, and it's very helpful the second time as well. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
You have a slide comparing the Boston versus Newton rate of emission reduction schedules. But you've also noted that Boston includes residential buildings in its BERDO, and the Newton numbers don't, at least for the moment, they don't. So I was wondering whether you have similar data for Cambridge, the Cambridge BERDO, which, like the Newton approach, is excluding residential buildings, at least for the moment. I mean, if you have such a slide and you can throw it up, great. If not, maybe you can just prepare it. I mean, it's wonderful to show maybe that we're being more gradual than Boston, but it's a little bit apples to oranges because of this very significant difference between, I mean, Boston, you could exclude the Boston residential numbers to compare, or whichever is easier for you, just to give us a handle on that. The other question I'm wondering about has to do with the commercial sector that you're focusing on. I know we're a lot smaller than Boston, but I would imagine that for some owners, the cost is going to be significant. And I'm wondering whether there are financing approaches that either the state is considering or that we should consider as a city that would at least be able to provide low interest loans to companies that would qualify. What's your thinking, or any progress on that aspect of all of this?
Well, I mean, the one thing we do know is available is utility incentives, utility rebates. I'm not sure. I think this is something we need to look into more as far as other financing options. So why don't I make a note to look into that and see what we can come up with. And
that would be great.
Yeah,
that'd be great. Very interesting.
Yeah, Mr.
Thanks.
Ferguson, anything you can do to sort of clarify how people comply and what you can do to ease the problem of compliance will be helpful when we get to the conversation at the council, but also for the public.
Sure, we'll look into that more, see what we can come up with.
Are you done, Councilor Blatt? Okay, yeah, I think you're okay. Councilor Leary and then Councilor Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to ask that same question about sources of state or federal funding that Councilor Block just brought up. I just do want to say how much I appreciate the enormous amount of work that Mr. Ferguson and his team and the Citizens Commission on Energy has done to bring us this far. I think it's not lost on me that Berto will have is a big deal. It will have the most significant impact on our ability to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions of anything else that we've done by far. So it's really critically important that we're talking about this and moving forward on it. And I also, Councilor Wright brought up some real world information about actually how building owners are going to comply with this, which I think is really important. So my question is really, and it's not going to be answered tonight, I don't think, but are we striking the right balance? Yes, there will be costs for compliance, but the reason we're doing this is the enormous cost climate change is already causing us. Over Memorial Day weekend, we just had 25 citizens killed in tornadoes that are causing billions and billions of dollars in property damage. We have to remember the costs of going slower will be significant. So that brings me to the question that I think we all got former chair of the Citizens Commission on Energy, Helena Brown's letter with her concern about delaying implementation of the residential buildings under 20,000 square feet. I think I started to get some answers to that as we've had this discussion about the devil can be in the details, and there might be other barriers that we need to look into. But why not? Why can't we have them start recording? I don't understand why we wouldn't include them in that measure. And I also had a question about the way that we're sort of delaying implementation, like we're not doing enforcement until 2033. That seems like a far pretty distant for us to start doing that, start doing the enforcement when we're expecting 0 in 2050. So I just had questions about the balance, how quickly we can possibly go without, while still being cognizant of the real world problems in terms of costs and the actual implementation. I just wanted to keep that in mind. Because, this is a critical, I think this is the most, it's more significant than electrification by far. And I just think we should move as quickly as we can, taking all these other things into consideration.
Thank you. Those are really important points. And we spent a lot of time in our Berto team meetings, talking about, you know, the rate of compliance and how steep the compliance curve should be. And, you know, we talked about impacts on building owners in terms of how are they going to be, how much time do they need to prepare, and how much time do they need to implement. And one thing that came out of it, and it's why we phased, it's one of the reasons we phased, is we think smaller buildings have less ability to comply and could benefit from a longer lead time. Larger buildings, as we previously discussed, usually have either in-house resources, consultants, they probably all have a architect or an engineer on retainer. And smaller buildings, that's not the case. So so that's part of the reasoning for the phasing. And the other part is for the benefit of the city, for the city to gradually develop its resources and its capabilities to deal effectively with all the buildings by phasing them in groups instead of trying to tackle them all at once. So those are some of the reasons behind the phasing. And we got a lot of input from building owners in the 9 information sessions we held. And we tried to take their comments into consideration and the design of the Berto and in the scheduling and phasing of the Berto. So, you know, we were listening, and this reflects what we were hearing.
That?
Yeah.
All right, I have Councilor Kayla, so he's been waiting, and then let me take him and then come back into the committee. After that, Denver and Wright again. Councilor Kayla, welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Ferguson. I caught the latter end. All I want to say is I think that the more examples, the better. Look at Boston, other cities. I think that's really gonna make an impact on us. And so I know, Chair, you asked about that. Who wants to see examples? I am definitely one of those, and I think that would be very helpful. That's all right now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so before we go there, let me just check with the colleagues here. Councilor Danberg and then Councilor Wright.
Yes, thank you. I think that the more information that we can have on this case study, the more helpful it would be to all of us. In regards to the phasing in, although it may feel like residential buildings are being phased in, if we're not going to bring them on board until 11 months from now, April of 2025, they're not really being given more time because the implementation period is the same. And what waiting a year and bringing them on in 2025 would really do is give them more time to not have to think about this, and then less time to have to actually comply. So I think that I don't see a downside to bringing them in and asking them to simply report, which is really all we're doing by bringing them in at this time. We're just asking for reporting because the phase-in will of penalties, let's say, will be years away. And in fact, I think they discovered in doing the analysis of 181 Lexington that the building will be in compliance if they do nothing until 2038. And that the emission standard under the Newton-Burdo would really give it and buildings like it ample time to plan for retrofits that they would need to do in order to be able to make this curve that we're seeing on the screen. So the point that I would make is that while it may seem like we're giving them an extra year, we're not. Because the implementation time is the same and it's just giving them a year to not have to look at this. When in fact, if all we were asking them to do is to report, then they would start putting eyes on the process.
That's a fair point. I think though, this is the issue that we're gonna try and reserve for some of the
Yes,
public
I
comments.
just wanted to make the comment. now.
Okay. Councilor Wright?
Kind of piggybacking on that, but I have a different perspective. So for the first year, taking a look at your proposed compliance timeline, there are 29 owners that need to comply in tier 1. And I would expect that we have enough staff to support those people. And then tier 2, 3, and 4 all need their reports the next year, and that's 150. And they're smaller companies, 150 owners, smaller projects, which they may need a lot more hand-holding, and they don't have the in-house support. And I'm wondering, and then if we add the residential properties on that, that's another 95. Do we have the staff in Newton to support this? I think the first year, yes, but next year going forward, I think will be more difficult.
Yeah, we've had discussions, with the mayor's office and with Maureen about staffing and resources. We have a budget for consulting, which is $165,000 for basically for fiscal year 25. And we're looking at hiring an FTE in fiscal year 26. So through some combination of consultants and an FTE, we think we can address the needs of the reporting phase of the Burdo requirement. We plan to do a lot of like workshop type programs for training building owners to use Portfolio Manager. We think that that's going to go a long way towards helping building owners to complete their energy reporting. We don't plan to do it for them. So they will have to find somebody either, in on their staff or a consultant to bring in to do that reporting for them. So, I mean, that would be their choice, whether to do it in-house or through a consultant, but either way, it's not a lot of time or money to do the reporting. And we think that, things should go fairly well in the second year of the reporting with the tiers 2 through 4 buildings. Once we've established kind of the template and the procedures by working with tier 1 buildings.
Okay, thank you. Just one other quick comment. It was on the additional slides on residential buildings. The numbers don't add up. So that's just a pet peeve of mine. They're only off by 1 or 2%, but they don't quite add up in the total GFA and the emissions number. That's it.
All right, thank
All
you.
right, let's take a look at that.
Councilor Farrell behind me, I'm sorry, I didn't see you before.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mrs. Ferguson. This is a very enlightening report. Appreciate it. As with Councilor O'Leary, I think it is going to be very expensive, but I think it would be mind-boggling expensive not to do it. I also am look at the cost to the city to administer and to comply. You're basing, I think, on fees and penalties. And while you suggest that it might not, where the city might not need a lot more staffing, I'm always concerned when we bring on a project like this and we don't bring on a source of funds to pay for it, to add to the ability of the city to fund it. And I guess I'm curious about whether there's been any discussion about a basic assessment to the businesses to help manage this. I mean, I've never been good at math, but if you did 2 cents per square foot, that would give the city a substantial increase in the budget. And it doesn't seem to me to be an excessive amount for a project that we must do. All of us must do it.
Right, we have considered that. Is Andrew Lee still here?
I am here, Bill.
Did you want to comment on that, Andrew?
Yeah, the answer is actually very straightforward. We can't assess any sort of fee for this particular project that the city has, this particular ordinance, because it would be deemed an illegal tax as opposed to an actual fee for services that the city would be providing, or an actual permit for something that an owner is seeking to do something with their property.
Thank you. So let's pause for a second, folks. It's 10:15. We have 2 other agenda items. I'm conscious that talk about energy use reporting, the energy of the committee is maybe fading.
Sugar.
Yeah, and notwithstanding energy injections of sugar, thanks to the vice chair and others who helped bring things in the room. So let's just talk for a minute about where we are in terms of process. While I'd be interested in the case studies, I'm tempted to reserve those actually for a little more extended presentation at the beginning of the June 10th conversation, because I think we need to understand those, and the public would need to understand them, and to do them twice may not be a good economy unless members of the committee want to see that. And I'm also concerned we have the whole update on our climate action plan, which I think deserves more than a moment of time, as well as we certainly have to vote an appointment, but that's renewed quickly. So let me just see where the committee feels we ought to go at this point. I'm tempted to reserve further conversation on this till another night when we're a little fresher at it. We've got a public hearing before this item comes up, however, on the question of how we measure building height, which we're going to hear from the planning department, a slightly modified version. They went back to talk to the building professionals, and there are a few iterations they want to sort out, not so much for single family, but for multifamily. But that's going to take, I'm sure, an hour, but I would like to reserve enough time for the public to comment. And we may not complete that comment, and frankly, if we really want to move on this that night, but I think that may be tough. So tell me, members of the committee, where are you at this point? Start with the vice chair and just go around.
It does seem to me that a lot of the questions excuse me, that I'm hearing now are going to require either additional work from city staff, input from the public, whether that's, on a professional, comment side, or literally what additional questions are out there. I'm tempted to proceed to hold on this item. I mean,
Tonight,
yeah, until we get to the public. Yeah.
Okay. Councilor Albright?
I think that getting the case studies would be excellent to add to our understanding of all of this.
Do you want it tonight, or do you want to wait?
No,
for the
not
10th?
tonight.
Okay, the 10th. Councilor Wright?
I'm a night owl. I can go as long as we need.
Go remind me of a roommate I had in law school who slept in the Pacific time zone. And, that was always good. Councilor Denver?
I have to get up early in the morning, so
Alright.
I'm for, yeah,
Alright.
putting it on hold.
And I'm not a member, so I'm leaving.
You're always welcome.
You got two more.
Thank you, great discussion, have a good night.
We have Councilor Kalos as a member and, Councilor Getz, any sense from you, Jen, folks?
I would say hold.
Agree.
So, folks, Mr. Ferguson, I thank you, and I don't want to, I hope, our consultant can return on the tenth. Because and we will talk before that meeting to try and structure the presentation a bit, so that we make the best use of the public's time and your time to give some examples, both of the commercial and the residential, because the residential issue is going to come up. You know that, so we might as well be prepared for it.
I'll move to hold.
Hang on just a second. And, that's, I hope will be, but I do want to mention that we've been, at least observed by a number of members of the Energy Commission, who, will have an opportunity to say something in, the other night's meeting. I have not given them that chance tonight, but I'm grateful for their attendance.
We'll keep coming back.
Yeah, well, that's kind of.
Say this again.
All right, so, yeah. So I'm gonna, accept a motion to hold by the vice chair. Is that okay? All right, and we'll hold, and then we'll have a conversation offline about the presentation and take it up on the 10th. All those in favor of hold, say aye.
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 Any abstentions? Okay, the ayes have it. We'll hold this item. Thank you very much, Mr. Ferguson, and others, who are interested. We have the two other items. I want to just, see whether, I'm tempted, even though I'm sorry, Ms. Silks, you're here to talk about the update on the climate action plan. I'd like to give you enough time to have a real update rather than a perfunctory update. What is your pleasure here? Do you want to reserve comment and come back to us a little later? Because I think, frankly, the plan is important, but this is really, the Berto is really part of the implementation of the plan. And if we're going to make the plan a reality, I would rather spend our time on Berto for a bit until we can then come back and see where we are afterwards. But you've been patient sitting through this, and I don't want to abuse the privilege.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for working on these big issues that, the electrification and Berto being, a huge portion of the climate work that we are doing. We prepared for this knowing that those first two items were going to take quite a bit of time. And so our plan for the evening was to do a fairly brief overview of some points that we were at. And so I'm happy to do that very quickly. And that is how I was planning on starting, of saying, would love to come back another time and go through things in more detail. But for tonight, happy to do a very short piece, or if no one wants to sit for even 30 seconds longer, happy to just plan for a later time overall.
I guess my instinct is if you're willing, I would rather bring you back at a later time when we can give you the attention you deserve. I'm just concerned that this has consumed a lot of our time. We do have an appointment where I have to move, but I would, if you're willing to, we'll make time on the agenda for you where you can do justice to the topic. But I think right now we're actually trying to make the plan a reality, and I think that's consuming a lot of our attention, and I prefer to have that attention be where we spend our time. Excuse me, I'd prefer us to spend our time on that and then come back to see where we are after we've done that, and then have you comment if that's all right.
Excellent.
Okay. All right. So I would just entertain the comment on the update of the action plan as 6324, a motion to hold.
Move to hold.
Thank you very much. Yeah, wonderful. Councilor Princeton.
Yeah, a little insulted by the last item, but that's okay.
Hey, man.
We want to keep protocol here. All right, all those in favor of hold, say aye.
Aye.
Abstention? Okay, the ayes have it. We hold that. The last item, and thank you, Ms. Elks, I appreciate again your flexibility. And then item 23024, which is a reappointment of James Miller to the Auburndale Historic District Commission. Many of you know Mr. Miller was the first planning director for the city of Newton, and notwithstanding his long and distinguished service, or rather, to complement his long and distinguished service, he's willing to come back and serve in this capacity as a volunteer. We're delighted, at least I'm delighted to have him, but I would, we have a Ward 4 councilor who might move his reappointment if he's.
I am happy to move approval.
Thank you very much. Councilor Princeman has moved approval. All those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions? The ayes have it. We're done. Okay, I think that takes care of it for the evening. I'm sorry I didn't get you out of here by 10, but
Motion to adjourn.
thank you very much. Vanberg, all those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we're done. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.